Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Samehada leaves Kisame for Naruto. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Obsidian Dreamer, and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video, and with that on with the show. Once more checking herself in the small mirror pinned to the side of the hostel wall, Shizune gave a last, brief look up to her hair, brushed a stray strand away from her face and nodded to herself in satisfaction. Without another glance, the aspiring medical Sannin walked to the door and pulled it open, shoes clicking softly on the polished room flooring and Tun as always at her heels, the sound of the small pig's trotters echoing in a softer counterpart to her owner's heavier tread. Well, this will be interesting if nothing else. The thought swirled around in the young woman's head as she ducked into the spacious bar of the traveling party's lodgings for the evening, itself a damn sight finer than some of the flea pits she'd been forced to slum in during her long, at times torturous apprenticeship to arguably the finest medical kunoichi to have ever walked the earth, the fiery slug Sannin Tsunade. Though believe me Naruto, nothing will stop me finding out just how you managed to pull this one off. Mastering the Rasengan in 3 days and then using it in a life-or-death struggle I can just about understand, but this. Standing up and seeing a very familiar orange-clad arm waving at her from one of the tables, she let a gracious smile and friendly attitude mask her inner deliberations. This one really puts the Naruto on the ramen. Hey Shizune-chan. Her train of thought was jolted on the rails at the genin's voice. Naruto being as usual oblivious to her inner thoughts as he studied the menu in front of him. I haven't seen the pervert all night. Has the pin-up disappeared as well? Naruto, Shizune instantly defended her sensei, though the struggle to keep the smile off her face was harder than she'd have liked it to be. Don't call Tsunade-sama a pin-up. She's a well-respected Sannin and more than earned her rank. As expected, he merely looked over the top of his menu and shrugged. It's either that or Bachan. Once more Shizune's lips flickered before she could iron them straight again, though Tun proved her worth once again by jumping into the seat next to the smaller ninja and placing a trotter on his leg, immediately rewarded with a scratch just behind her ears. Hey Tun, she managed to talk Erosenin out of cooking you for another day then? Too right I did. Just for once the young kunoichi's face darkened as she remembered the laughing toad sage offered the idea up as a change from the packs of ramen Naruto had brought with him. If her scowl hadn't quashed the idea, the impact of her sensei's fist to his jaw a split second later certainly had. Tsunade had always had a soft spot for her apprentice's pet. Anyway, seen anything good on the menu? Or is it ramen for you again tonight? Ramen is the kami of foods. Naruto shot back affronted before his sudden ire collapsed in on itself and he muttered mutinously. Though they don't serve it here. If I'd known that I'd have made sure I picked somewhere else to stop for the night. It would have been better food and probably cheaper into the bargain. Unable to stop herself this time, Shizune simply watched the blonde ninja pout at the same time as tried to get the few pieces of information she had gleaned so far stick together, to form something like a picture in her mind. In truth, if was nothing to go on, she'd been as surprised as anyone when, just as Jiraiya had finished collecting firewood from the small copse near the campsite they'd decided on for the night, Naruto had suddenly stood up and declared he was sick of camping out under the stars and was going to do something about it. Before anyone else could stop him, there were hundreds of orange-clad bodies almost tumbling over one another in every direction. Once this mass shadow clone melee had dispersed, Naruto had simply sat back down and resisted all attempts by both Sannin to reveal what he was up to, driving both Jiraiya and Tsunade to distraction by deflecting attention to their age and questionable hobby activities respectively. Eventually, just as dusk began to fall and Shizune started to become seriously worried about both the blonde shinobi's sanity and imminent physical health, Tsunade had that look in her eye that usually spelled murder for anyone standing between her and the nearest bottle of sake. He jumped into the branches of the nearest tree and said, somewhat less than politely, to keep up with him unless they wanted to spend another night in the tents listening to the toad sage's snoring and perverted dreaming giggles. And follow him we did, right to this place. How he'd known exactly where it was the kunoichi wasn't entirely sure. Something else she wanted to find out before the night was over, but it was at the inn he'd eventually led them to that he pulled out his biggest surprise, though whether that was from generosity or to try and ward off the killing intent those two were sending his way I'm not sure. Either way, without turning a hair he casually walked in and ordered 2 rooms. Before anyone could muster a protest about how limited funds were at the moment, his hand had dived into his bag and withdrawn Gamachan. The size of the roll of notes the stuffed frog had contained was enough to make even Shizune's eyes widen, while Tsunade was virtually drooling at the sight, already translating the cash into bottles of sake and hands of cards she could play at the local gambling table. However, as with most things not related to ninjutsu, the money simply hadn't mattered to Naruto. Once the rooms were paid for, he took his still considerable amount of change, replaced it in Gamachan, and strolled up the stairs to his room without another word, leaving 2 Sannin and 1 Sannin in training stunned speechless in his wake. From there it had come to this. Her sensei had said nothing beyond a few muttered words that she was going out for the evening with Jiraiya, and Shizune hadn't seen her since, leaving her with the proverbial hot potato in her lap. Still, she decided that a little fishing couldn't hurt, and truth be told, she was damned curious as to how the jumpsuited shinobi had managed to earn himself such a respectable wad of currency. But even in the little time she'd known him, she knew that going in completely open wouldn't quite work with Naruto, though it often got some results. To get the best reactions out of him, a little tact and a little time were the tools of the trade. Be that as it may, she opened her own menu and smiled at him. I'm glad to be here. It looked like it would rain earlier and I hate waking up to a drizzly morning. Anyway, to answer your question, I don't know where either of them are, though knowing the pair of them probably having a whale of a time for old time's sake. Naruto grinned. For old time's sake with old timer's sake, he quipped, making his partner for the evening sputter before she could control herself. Though how they drink that stuff is beyond me. It's like trying to swallow smoke. You've tried? He shrugged at the question. Erosen gave me a sip out the corner of his saucer once, said it wouldn't do me any harm. He made a bitter face as though tasting something sour. He was half right. Which, give him credit, is better than average for him. Shizune shook her head. He's just unstoppable when he's in the right mood. Tsunade, I think you got it right tonight. By now you'd be a quivering mess of either laughter or rage. Maybe not, you'd be a better judge of that than I would. Still, deciding that was enough of the groundwork laid. The medic Nin leant forward slightly and gestured around the room with her eyes. I must say I'm curious as well as grateful. How did you? Even before she finished she could see from his azure eyes that he'd second-guessed the question. His grin spread even wider, becoming positively fox-like as he quirked an eyebrow towards her, stretching his arms behind his head as he smiled contentedly. I wondered who'd be the first to ask. Have to say I put odds on it being Tsunade-bachan, but, well, can't win them all. He suddenly chuckled at a joke Shizune presumed she wasn't privy to before finishing. Just as long as you win the important ones, hey? I suppose, the medical kunoichi answered after a long second's pause before, realizing she was hooked, decided to hold her breath and take the plunge feet first. Am I going to regret asking or can I back out now? To her complete non-surprise, Naruto shook his head, smile now just about separating his head into two. No place for quitters here, Nei-chan. Okay, I'll spill. He leant across the table again, lowering his voice. Just one thing though, don't tell either of the others because, well, I'm sure one would kill me and the other. He tailed off, shuddering. I don't even want to think about that. Okay, silence is golden, Shizune said almost without realizing her lips had moved. Before she could get too far ahead of herself, however, Naruto had spoke again. Suits me. Fine, well, to tell this one I've got to go back a few steps. Remember the bet I had with Bachan about this? His hand disappeared beneath the neck of his shirt, and emerged a second later with a necklace of black rock held beneath it. Seeing it, Shizune nodded. How could she not remember that? Yes, of course I do. You won when you got Jiraiya-sama too. No, Naruto cut her off gently before giving a mental prod. The other bet. At the mere mention of this memory, Shizune felt her cheeks go red and her face fall into her hands. True enough, this was another memory she'd never get rid of. This one for all the wrong reasons. How could I forget? I've never been so embarrassed in public in all my life, and this is coming from someone who's been living with Tsunade for the past Camilo knows how many years. Tsunade, the world's worst gambler and second worst drunk who occasionally pieces together someone important enough to keep the debtors off our backs for a few weeks. I was just forgetting that nightmare. Why'd you have to go and dredge it up again? Because suddenly Shizune felt the skin on the back of her neck prickle. If his voice were any lower he'd be purring. What's he got up his sleeve this time? There was a bit more to that bet than met the eye. I never thought I'd say it, but looks like the Erosenin was right. The voice cut through the smoky atmosphere of the gambling den like a thrown kunai. You really suck at this. Beat it, Gaki. Tsunade grumbled out the corner of her mouth as she scooped her cards up. You're throwing me off my game. Shizune sat at the side of the Sannin with an expression that spoke volumes of how often she'd been here before. Saw his eyes skirt over how few chips lay on Tsunade's side of the table and mentally counted down. 3, 2, 1. What game? The let's give my money to the casino game. It's about the only one you can play well. Your luck's worse than that barbecue in Konoha that had offered an all-you-can-eat buffet on Choji's birthday. The cards in Tsunade's hand started to crinkle from her grip as she turned her slightly bloodshot eyes towards the boy smirking just off to her left. I won't say it again, Gaki, she stated clearly, killer intent starting to leak from her body as she took in her latest antagonist. Beat it. Unless you've got that airball mastered yet, I've nothing to say to you. Those words hit a nerve. For the first time Naruto winced, and, as he drew his right hand out from behind him, so did Shizune. It was blistered and blackened, showing symptoms of chakra burn as well as heavy impact damage. It was obviously a hand that had seen some very heavy abuse during his training. It's coming, he remarked semi-cheerfully, obviously wanting to change the subject. Anyway, I'll just watch. Jiraiya told me to wait here while he did his research. Shizune was grateful to see that his expression at those words matched her own. Obviously the super pervert hadn't corrupted the boy's mind entirely yet, though his face brightened as he finally picked her out from the drab curtains at her back. Hey Shizune-chan, Tun. Hearing her name, the pig pricked her ears and stood up from where she'd been laying at her owner's side, hopping off the flat cushion and trotting smartly over to where Naruto sat down. As he patted his lap, the pig gratefully jumped into it, closing her eyes as she received a pleasing back rub. Though at first Naruto had been a little wary of Tun, wondering who in their right mind would want a pig as a pet rather than a more useful, aggressive animal like a tiger. He'd come to see her as something similar to a chubbier, hairless version of Akumaru, though with less hair and, more importantly to him, less of an odor problem, especially following rain of any kind. Anyway, true to his word, he merely watched quietly as the game wore on, not making a comment or a sound no matter how often Tsunade cursed, swore and railed against the fates as she lost hand after hand and pot after pot until, finally broke. The Sannin threw down her last hand accursed foully. Arg, damn it all, Shizune. Oh no. The assistant Kunoichi had been hoping the sake would blur her sensei's perception enough to make her forget she was there at all. But obviously there was no such luck to be had this time. Get another 1,000, and a better bottle of sake. This one tasted like it came out a cow. But Tsunade-sama, it was probably a hopeless effort but she had to try anyway. We need that money for. Here we go then. It had been a lost cause from the outset but, seeing the way the slug Sennin's eyes suddenly flashed, Shizune braced herself to prepare for the worst. However, her deliverance came from the most unlikely source imaginable. You don't need money, Ba-chan, Naruto said calmly, rummaging in his pocket for something. I've got what you need right here. As Gama-chan was brought into the air, Shizune breathed a silent sigh of relief. The sight of money, especially someone else's money, was always enough to turn Tsunade's head for a few minutes at least. However, her relief curdled into confusion a few seconds later as, rather than unclip the frog wallet, Naruto instead flipped it over and undid a tiny zip along the belly of the little green beast. A couple of fingers slipped inside and, with an exclamation of triumph a second later, Konoha's #1 knucklehead pulled something from its recesses into the light. Holding his prize up for all to see, behold, he demanded, the light catching off the coin in his hand, my lucky charm. Lucky charm, Tsunade repeated in a dead tone of voice, taking in the grubby, slightly battered form of the silver of metal before her. How in Kami's name has that thing ever been lucky? It's got you as an owner, hasn't it? Ignoring the barb, Naruto merely explained in his own time. Found it one night when I was out for my evening jog, he mentioned, casually ignoring the circumstances behind said jog, including a mob of angry, possibly drunken villagers and several heavy items landing within inches of his heels. I can always call right with this coin. Doesn't matter how often, it's never wrong. Really? You bet. Look, dragon. He held one head of the coin towards both sensei and apprentice, letting them see the slightly faded metal face of the mythical beast staring at them from the minted surface before flipping it over. And dragon, he explained, the two sinuous tails entwined on the rear of the coin proving him right. It never loses. A double-headed coin, well, sort of. Technically it wasn't double-headed but, going by Naruto's logic, it was hard to call it otherwise. The offer wasn't something a professional gambler like Tsunade was going to miss, but it was his next words that brought her up sharp. How about a wager? Oh no, if there was one sentence in the world Shizune hated, other than just one more for the road, it was that one. Her mentor could never turn down a challenge, and she could understand that in a way. It was just the fact that she could never win them either that irked Shizune the most. As usual though, Tsunade simply suspended her common sense, and let her addiction take over in her mind as she swiveled in her seat to face the other blonde. You're on Gaki, she grated, cracking her knuckles. What's the bet? This. Naruto idly flipped the coin and caught it on the back of his hand before pointing at what, at first looked to be a very rude and, from his point of view, very unwise place to be looking for that necklace. Don't worry, Ba-chan, he said, half mocking and half sincere as Tsunade's hand instinctively flexed to her neck. I'll make a gamble, even you can win. No, Shizune shook her head, absolutely convinced that this was the one wager not even Tsunade would take up. Not for something that precious to her heart. Not for that, not even she would. I'm listening, Gaki. Make it good. As her apprentice all put face planted in shock, the Sannin gulped the rest of her sake down in one, though her eyes never left the new opponent in front of her as he stood up, dislodging Tuntun, who jumped to the floor with an irritated snort before pacing back to his owner, and jumped into her arms. My time usually costs money, a lot of money. Can't think why, Naruto muttered under his breath before speaking properly, holding up his hand for all to see. Okay, you're a medic nin, Kami help us. Tsunade growled softly but let him carry on. So you probably know better than I do how screwed up this hand is. I can barely feel it even now. The bet's this. You remember the basic, the first thing you learn in the academy to get your hand-eye coordination up to speed. You can remember that far back. One more word, Gaki, and I'll hit you so hard your ancestors will wince. The slug sage snarled, temper already irked by her consistent bad luck so far in the night. But yes, I know what you're on about. With a flourish, Tsunade lifted the necklace up and held it by its string, letting it sway softly. So, you're betting you can catch this out the air while I'm swinging it with your bad hand? At his nod the Sannin laughed, clapping her hands harshly. You're on, Gaki. Tonight my bad luck lifts forever. No way you can do it. He snorted and rolled his eyes. That's the idea, Ba-chan. In fact, just to make sure of it, I'll have my eyes shut when I'm doing it, he boasted boldly. At this, Tsunade simply cackled and reached forwards eagerly, grabbing his nearest hand and seemingly unaware as her opponent nearly fainted at the sudden explosion of pain from the end of his arm. You're on. Shizune, you're our spotter. Make sure the little baka doesn't try to pull a fast one. With a resigned sigh, the younger woman stood up slowly and squeezed past her seated sensei with Tuntun in her arms, coming to a halt just behind where Naruto was now stood and standing with her arms folded. She stood in that position for no longer than a few moments before almost leaping through the roof in shock as a heavy hand slapped down on her shoulder. Sorry I'm late. Hope the Gaki wasn't any trouble. Jiraiya. It was indeed the Toad Sage who had startled her so, his rough voice softening as he looked past her at where his student stood facing off against his old teammate. What's going on? Some kind of crazy bet, Shizune sighed as Tsunade suddenly twisted her wrist and the necklace went from stationary to a propeller, blurring and humming through the air as Naruto tensed up, the necklace against some kind of lucky coin Naruto has. He has to catch the necklace with his eyes shut and his bad hand to win. She felt rather than heard the older man snort, feeling the creasing of the fabric around him as he folded his arms. I bet she might finally win at last, he said eventually, seeing the muscles in his student's back tense. The moment of the strike was merely seconds away. What is Naruto up? It was a sentence he never finished as, at that precise second, the blonde boy's hand whipped forwards. A second after that, a complete hush fell over the gambling den like a funeral shroud. Shizune felt the blood drain from her face as her hands flew to her cheeks, eyes almost bulging from her head as she tried, and failed, to take in the scene before her, Tun falling to the floor with an outraged squeal. All that was running through her head were two thoughts. How on earth did this happen? And, how am I going to put him back together when she gets through with him afterwards? As Jiraiya was borne away to the happy place perverts go whenever they see one of their lifelong fantasies acted out before their eyes on the back of an S-class nosebleed. The only thing souring his sensation of ecstatic bliss was the disappointment that it hadn't been him who had the courage to act out his fantasies. Ha! As he felt his fist snap close over something, even over the throb of agony from his injured arms, Naruto felt himself flushed with triumph. Looks like you really have the worst luck in the world, Bachan. You have to pay up. It was only then, as he opened his eyes to see Tsunade's eyes inches from his own, mouth open in a perfect O of shock, that he realized something wasn't quite right with the situation. However, it was only when he rolled his eyes downwards that his eyes bulged out, and his mouth ran dry, that he finally understood what it was that was keeping his hand so unfeasibly warm. Ah! Without thinking or releasing his grip, Naruto ripped his hand back out of the proverbial danger zone. Unfortunately, as Tsunade, like most kunoichi, wrapped herself rather than wore anything else, and Naruto had inadvertently grabbed a large handful of the aforementioned wrappings. This wrenching motion resulted in the exposure of the slug Sannin's heaving bosom to the majority of the gambling den, most of the assembled men simply passing out on the spot from an unexpected pleasure overload. Naruto finally let go as Tsunade hastily fought to stuff her dignity, amongst other things, back down her blouse, face aflame and pride in tatters as she was rendered speechless by the inadvertent violation. How did that happen? Finally managing to spark some life back into her previously spinning mind, the kunoichi tried to rationalize that she had just let someone barely out of his teens get hold of something that most of the men in her life had been lusting after forever. There's no way, this is just a bad dream. A genjutsu, a quick release, and I'll be back in the gambling den, wasted on sake. You know, I always wondered where medic neens kept their bandages. The beautiful illusion was shattered by the knucklehead's words. Naruto's face still as red as hers as he looked away in a belated attempt to give her some privacy. Is that why they're always nice and warm when you use them? Shock once more blanketed her mind. Nothing was present in her mind, not reason, logic, or even good old-fashioned bone-breaking anger could sparkle in her mind in the face of such a blatant cheek after his earlier, unforgivable conduct. She could only watch, open-mouthed still, as with a sigh he slowly slipped his uninjured hand into his pocket, and reluctantly pulled out the coin he'd shown them all earlier, and even more reluctantly offered it forwards. Oh well, all good things come to an end. Here, the little disc of metal winked and flashed in front of her unfocused eyes as he waved it in front of her, obviously wanting her to take it. You won it, Tsunade-sama. Hope it's as lucky for you as it was for me. You sure need it. As though in a dream, the Sannin lifted one leaden hand and plucked the coin from his fingers, marveling at the feel of the cold, rough metal between her fingertips as the gaki's words echoed in her head. You won, you won, you won. I won, she breathed, the message finally sinking in as she clenched the coin in her fist. I won, this is it. The curse is broken. Suddenly, madly delirious joy surged through her veins as she clutched the spoils of her victorious bet to her recently ruffled chest. Grin almost as wide as Naruto's usually was, and laughter echoing raucously all around her. I'm on a roll. Nothing can stop me now. Shizune-chan, stop gawping like a landed flounder and get some more chips. With the speed of a demon and predatory gaze of a hawk, she pounced on and began shuffling the deck, apparently unaware that all her former player partners were currently sprawled out unconscious with extreme blood loss from their noses and happy smiles on their faces as she slammed the cards down on the table. The winning streak starts here. Even now that image lingered in her mind, almost an unprecedented length of time for someone whose best friend in the world was legendary, almost as much for her drinking and gambling as she was for her medical skills. Shizune once more fought down the blush in her cheeks as she grappled with the memory, glaring across the table at her diminutive partner as he beamed across at her as though butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. Why'd you have to go and dredge that old ghost up? She demanded with a hint of irritation, though, hand on heart, she doubted she'd ever feel truly angry with Naruto for any reason. In that regard she imagined she was very much like her sensei, however much the Sannin might have openly cursed the blonde shinobi's name. For his part, Naruto merely reclined in his seat, smirking as he steepled his fingers on his stomach. Well, I brought it up because I needed to. Before she could question him further, he answered her unspoken question. Ever heard the phrase lose some to win some? Well, that's what I did that night. You know, he beckoned her over with a conspiratorial wink. If there's one thing I've learned traveling with Jiraiya-sama, it's that the more perverted the man, the easier he can be manipulated. What? Totally bamboozled by now, Shizune could only offer a blank look that had Naruto chuckling again. I was watching while I waited for the game to finish, and the owner of that place didn't get his eyes past Tsunade's neckline once all night. About the only thing holding him back was the fact that death by angry Bachan would be long, painful, and, worst of all, excruciatingly embarrassing. So? What's that got to do with everything? All I did was make a little bet with him before playing my game with Granny, the boy explained, eyes sparkling with glee and triumph. I bet him his whole night's takings that I could cop a better feel off Tsunade than anyone else in the bar all night without getting punched halfway to IWA in retaliation. The jokes afterwards, well, he shrugged as Shizune's jaw dropped, that was just fun. Do you know how much a place like that turns over in a night? Enough to keep us happy as Tuntun in mud until we get back to Konoha. The silence that followed that announcement was so deep it was almost profound. Between the flabbergasted kunoichi and gleefully satisfied shinobi existed a gulf of understanding so wide a cloister of monks could have meditated for years and not come even close to understanding it. It seemed too immense, so monolithic, that nothing either of them did could break it, and indeed nothing either of them did. It was only the sound of a smashing bottle from somewhere behind them that made both their heads turn. A few tables behind them, an old woman was coming to her feet in a puddle of spilt sake and broken glass with far too much speed and agility for someone of such advanced age. And the even older man by her side, no way he was that old if he could vault over the table like that as Naruto felt a cold, hard ball of dread solidify and drop into his stomach like one of Sakura's rice balls. There was the charismatic cloud of a dispelling henge and a sudden band of pressure constricted his knees, Jiraiya hugging him as though her were life itself as tears poured from his eyes. Teach me, O master. Dropping his grip, the toad Sannin dropped prostrate to the floor, voice muffled as he spoke directly into the floorboards. Ask anything of me and it's yours. Any jutsu, any money, the entire first collection of Ika Paradise signed and illustrated. Just tell me your secret in the ways of women. Luckily at that point the perverted Erosanin's tirade came to an end courtesy of an enraged Tsunade's boot landing in his side with a painful crunch. He crashed into the doorframe at the opposite end of the room with a resounding thunk and lay still, twitching occasionally as his ungentlemanly desires ran rampant in his comatose subconscious. In the meantime Naruto was busy mentally composing his own death poem at extremely short notice, as the extremely enraged slug sage whipped her head around to him, fist clenched and murder in her eyes as what he'd said to Shizune in supposed confidence echoed in her head. The kunoichi glared down at the genin as though he were a worm on a dissection board, sizing him up as though were to make the first of 1,000 deadly, painful cuts that would be his end. Meep! At once her burning gaze traveled singed the air and flayed her apprentice alive. Shizune had one hand clamped hard to her mouth, face rapidly purpling as noises like a mouse being strangled escaped from her pinched lips. Faced with such base betrayal, the Sannin merely felt her rage swell to epic proportions. Such a destructive force coalesced inside a single mortal being that would have made the Kyubi no Kitsune itself back down in terror. With breath all but smoking from her lips, Tsunade extended in single, deadly digit towards where Shizune flopped over sideways on the seat, still trying to choke off her laughter as best she could. Traitor! The Sannin ground out before transferring her attention back to Naruto, fully expecting the boy to have passed out after exposure to such a potent killing intent. Instead, incredibly, his gaze was set towards the entrance of the inn, eyes huge and terrified as he pointed and gabbled desperately. Debt collectors, bailiffs. At that her anger left her for a moment, fled and run away as she jumped back, excuses already in her mind and on HR lips. I swear I'll pay you next month, she shouted, hands up as though pushing a foe away. I just need a few more wiha. There was no one there. She turned back in confusion, just in time to see an orange-clad form vault over Jiraiya's prone form and run like hell for the stairs of the inn. Realizing she'd been had twice in a week by the same shinobi, Tsunade's wrath exploded again, this new wrath eclipsing its predecessor like a bonfire would outside a candle. Without another word she charged in pursuit of the jumpsuited posterior, screaming at Naruto to stand and fight like a man. Not hearing as Shizune finally broke down completely, hugging her stomach as the laughter roared out of her unstoppably. Her mirth only spurred on further as she heard the muted thunder of feet on the floor above her, and snatched of conversation filtered down to her ears. You can't run forever. Watch me try. Stop dodging around the table. To the decent thing and receive a beating. I'll even heal you when I've finished. You can't say fairer than that. Fairer than that, man-bachan. Is there anything you can't lose at? Yipe. Die. I was worried about settling down in Konoha once, and the small part of Shizune's mind that could still think rationally instead of simply babbling with uncontrollable hysteria. The trainee medical Sannin decided that she might be able to return to her former home at last. But on this evidence, it's going to be an absolute riot. Let's get this show rolling. In the village hidden in the leaves, in the Hokage's office, many unusual things were happening. The elite ANBU unit, sworn protectors of the venerable Hokage himself and ninja without compare, were stunned into absolute speechlessness, swords hanging slack by their sides and fingers that could have summoned city-leveling jutsus in an eye blink completely still, faces as frozen as the masks that covered their faces and identities. The resident genjutsu mistress was trying frantically to dispel the illusion before her, knowing what she was seeing could not be reality. Even as she focused and released her chakra, however, a small sliver of her mind was a little disappointed that she'd have to break such a wonderful illusion. It wasn't every day that she could look one of the most notorious perverts in the leaf in the eye without having to peer over the cover of the book she despised so much. The father and son duo of smokers were currently not partaking in their usual vice. The younger of the two didn't seem to have realized that the cigarette he'd been about to light was now on the floor rather than between his lips, and he was in danger of setting his beard on fire with the lighter spluttering in his slack fingers, while the elder, having dropped his pipe on the desk and overcome his shock slightly quicker than the younger shinobi around him, tried to subtly waft the ashes towards the resident paperwork mountain, while everyone else was gaping at the apparition before them. Meanwhile, the reason for all this commotion seemed oblivious to the reactions around him, and merely stood leant against the wall next to the window he'd come in from, chin in his hand and a faraway look in the eye not covered by his slanting headband, seemingly considering a weighty matter indeed. It was a tableau that could have been frozen in time forever, and indeed looked like it would. It was only the scent of burning parchment that seemed to snap at least one of the assembled zombies back into the real world. Hokage-sama. There was a sudden hiss as a low-level water jutsu drenched the smoldering pile of paper on the desk of the aged village leader. That went about as well as I could have hoped. I might even get a few hours relaxation today. Keeping the glee of outwitting and banishing the bane of all Kages for the moment off his wrinkled face, Sarutobi looked towards the ANBU who'd put out the fire and nodded gravely in thanks before turning his attention back to the root of the issue before him. Na Kakashi? The masked ninja blinked as though shocked at the voice before shaking himself and looking at his superior. Hi Hokage-sama? No excuse, nothing. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed. This was unusual, and he didn't like unusual. It usually meant there was trouble on the way, and he dealt with enough of that to last several lifetimes. You are on time and you don't seem to have your usual reading material with you. Knowing what day it is today, I assume this may be due to the results of your genin test? Not that I would blame you if it was. Despite himself, the Hokage smiled fondly, knowing one of the members of the cell Kakashi had tested, and wondering if the bewhiskered shinobi had once again done the impossible and broken one of his finest ninja of his virtually lifelong tardiness habit. Naruto is the Kage killer for a reason. I imagine a former ANBU captain would be easy meat for him now. With those words, the tension in the room was broken and fled like a pack of Inuzuka dogs threatened with bathwater and shampoo. Everyone in the office relaxed, least of all Kakashi himself. Giving his infamous eye smile, the masked ninja chuckled before speaking again. Kage killer, eh? That does surprise me, though I suppose it shouldn't, knowing what I know about him now. He's the reason I'm here. Distracted me enough that I didn't keep an eye on the time like I should have. For once in your life, Kurenai muttered just loud enough to hear, a little annoyed that Kakashi had turned out to be real rather than a new illusion technique she could learn. At least there's no lame excuse this time. The older nin simply smiled again before continuing as though the raven-haired Kunoichi hadn't spoken. But aside from that, I wanted a little advice before I made a decision on the fate of Team 7. That was enough to get all attention focused on the man. Very few people in the room had ever known Kakashi be stumped by a problem, least of all one that seemed to be posed by a mere genin of all things, even one containing a mythical bijou. Even Sarutobi raised an eyebrow at the declaration before his analytical mind, the prized asset that had allowed him to attain his prestigious title of God of Shinobi, went to work on the problem. I see, you gave them your standard bell test, I assume? Hi. It went as well as it usually does. A collective wince ran around the room. The bell test was almost as infamous amongst the ninja of Konoha as Tora the cat. The reason Kakashi had never passed his genin team. But while it was going on, I had some shadow clones watching my team, and Naruto's behavior was a little unusual. Unusual? Asuma repeated, seeking a nicotine buzz to aid his thinking as he stooped down to retrieve his dropped cigarette, taking the opportunity to sneak a glance at Kurenai's shapely derriere as he did so. Unusual how? Last I heard he was a kid who couldn't sit still and would tell anyone who got close enough he was going to take Pop's job one day. He was, Kakashi said with another of his smiles, tried to attack me before I said go, and, when I did and the other two scattered, he just stood there waiting for a fight. Said he wanted to check something. His taijutsu is abysmal, by the way. Even with those shadow clones he uses, he didn't come close. Though I doubt he'll sit down tonight to think about it. Seeing a few raised eyebrows among the newer jounin, he brought his fingers together in a tiger seal, sending another wince rippling through the assembled crowd. Shifting uncomfortably in his seat as unpleasant memories of his own graduation came back to him, Sarutobi cleared his throat and tried to move the discussion on. I see. Any idea what he wanted to check? No, at least I didn't then, but I'll come back to that, the scarecrow replied, all business in his tone now as he recounted the remainder of his test. After I left him to cool down near the river with a shadow clone to keep an eye on him, I went after the others. The girl needs help. She fell apart in a fairly low-level genjutsu and is a fangirl of the highest order. She'll need some help to break out of that mentality before it gets her killed. Almost without meaning to, he saw Kurenai's face harden into a scowl. Good. If I can get her on my side, that might sugar the pill for what I want to do with these three. And the Uchiha, well, not as gifted as he likes to think he is, though his fire affinity is quite well developed. He has no sense of teamwork and an ego bigger than the Hokage monument. The title Rookie of the Year has gone to his head, and it needs work to puncture it. As is always the way, I think Guy is still struggling with that Hyuga from last year, one of the other jounins piped up, pushing his glasses up his nose as he did so. So they didn't work together then? Kakashi shook his head. No, though the clone I left with Naruto reported some interesting things. After I left him, he tried to track me down. Pretty well as my clone almost lost him a few times. But when he came across Sakura, he didn't help her immediately, which was odd. He took off her headband and did something to it, couldn't see what, before replacing it and waking her up. What happened then? Asuma asked, curious as in all the time he'd known Naruto, he'd never seen or heard of the boy not coming to the help of one of his precious people immediately. And Sakura is not precious to him, though Kami alone knows why. He got a punch on the head, a short rant that he'd never be as good as her Sasuke-kun, and a declaration that she was going to find the Uchiha and prove love conquers all. Kakashi smirked behind his mask as he realized his numerous prods were having the desired effect. Kurenai was looking almost murderous by now, then she left. The wrong way, by the way, before Naruto picked himself up and sent a shadow clone after her. After that he shot off looking for Sasuke. Did he find him? Yes, it wasn't hard. The Uchiha wasn't going anywhere fast. In fact, buried up to his neck he wasn't going anywhere at all. The image got a few smirks. Even an outright chuckle from Aoba, sensei of Team 2 and well known as the Jounin, with a sense of fun almost as keen as Naruto's. As expected of the only ninja ever to prank Mitarashi Anko and live to tell the tale. Of course Naruto found him and promptly fell over laughing. The look on Sasuke's face was worth 1,000 words. Even more so when Naruto took off his headband just to check if this thing was real. Aoba was outright snorting by now, half hunched over and probably, Kakashi guessed, cursing that Naruto hadn't been on his squad. But after that he replaced it and summoned some clones to help dig him up. As he was doing this, Sakura finally arrived and started to help, which quite surprised me. Naruto was saying he trapped an area of the training ground, but the others weren't listening from what I could see and hear. Sasuke was convinced he could go it alone and Sakura was right behind him. But before anything else could happen the buzzer went off. The anticlimactic ending seemed to depress the whole room. Despite himself, Kakashi was quite the storyteller when it came to descriptions such as this. Sarutobi remembered that even as a genin he could turn a standard capture Tora mission report into a heart-pounding chase across most of Fire Country, while dodging villagers and missing Nin alike. Though that was before he lost his team and sensei. It is a shame you've never been able to let that go, Kakashi. The future is a brighter place than you can see, even with the Sharingan. So, they didn't pass then, one of the assembled Jounin, Ginma, ventured, rolling his ever-present Saban across his lips as he did so. The council's going to raise hell over this. The last Uchiha going back to the academy for another year. The thought was enough to make Sarutobi groan and reach for the headache medicine secreted in a corner of one of his desk drawers before another voice cut across his depressed thoughts. Ma, not so fast, Kakashi mentioned lightly, making everyone look up at him again. I wasn't finished. Yes, they were out of time, but one of them wasn't out of ideas. I appeared with my usual dramatic flair and took them back to the training posts before roping Naruto to one of them. Why him? Though he'd not had much to do with the boy beyond being dragged into the odd chase as the boy sought to get out of town following some prank or other, Aoba felt compelled to stand up for a fellow prankster in need. From what you've told us, he did the best out of all of them. Certainly better than the girl in the squad. No offense, Kurenai-san, he added hastily, remembering present company and ensuring the kunoichi knew he meant no offense to her gender. Before the genjutsu mistress could reply though, she was cut off by Kakashi himself. A brisker, more businesslike tone to his voice now. I had to in order have any chance of their second chance working. If I'd used Sasuke, Sakura would have fed him regardless of what I said. If I'd used Sakura, Naruto would have done the same. It wasn't fair, but it had to be him. Thing was, after I tied him, put down the hissy fit Sasuke through and explained the rules, Naruto threw a shuriken in the works. But if anyone feeds Naruto before the second test starts, you all fail regardless. Having said his piece, Kakashi prepared to vanish away before a sudden voice, or more accurately the claim that voice was making, made him pause. Net Kakashi-sensei, we don't need another chance. Is he for real? Looking over at the restrained member of Team 7 with a hardened eye, the Jounin was pleased to see the boy squirm a little before dropping his gaze to the floor. Oh? And why do you have any reason to say that? At least your teammates may have a chance to graduate if you pull your weight. It was a little harsh, especially as Kakashi had seen it wasn't true. In his opinion, Naruto had a lot of potential untapped, and he knew at least some of that was due to neglect at the academy. But having lived through and grown up in wartime, the older ninja belonged firmly in the tough love camp. If mere words were enough to break a ninja, what good could he be where the kunai were flying and all hell was breaking loose? He was expecting disappointment, possibly even tears for trampling so casually on a dream he knew Naruto cherished. What he did not expect was for the demon vessel to suddenly look up, face ablaze with a grin that shone more brightly than any ration jutsu and lightness in his voice. I don't have to say anything, Sakura-chan, Sasuke team. He nodded at each of his teammates in turn. Undo your headbands. Obviously, Kakashi wasn't the only one who thought the boy had lost his marbles. What are you talking about, dope? Naruto Baka, stop trying to show off and be cool like Sasuke-kun. We're all in trouble because of you. Shut up before you make it worse. From where I'm standing it can't get worse, he shot back, trying to shrug as best he could with his shoulders wrapped up by ropes. Just do it. Interested despite himself, Kakashi looked over the top of his book and reluctantly removed his eyes from the inspired scribblings in time to see his other two students shared. A look before, with a final huff, Sakura reached up and roughly pulled on the cloth of her headband, tugging the whole thing off and letting her pink hair spill over her face and down the back of her neck. There, okay Baka, What was the big A musical tinkle by her feet made her pause at the same time the grin on Naruto's face threatened to consume half his head and Kakashi came closer than he'd ever thought possible to dropping his beloved Ika Paradise Limited Color Edition, signed by the author. Rolled up against the cherry blossom girl's left foot was a small, slightly battered toy bell. All was still, each of the assembled neens gawking at the tiny toy before, with a strangled cry. Sasuke almost ripped his own headband off without undoing the knot. Sliding the cloth through his fingers, the so-called prodigy let out a very Uchiha gasp as the second bell fell into his palm. Seeing this, Kakashi whipped his free hand down to his belt. As he drew his hand up, he was equal parts confused and relieved to see the two bells still attached to his belt. He cheated, he must have extra. That comforting line of reasoning was cruelly ripped away from him as both bells in his hands exploded in clouds of smoke. Shadow clones, hinged shadow clones. Their chakra constructs so are virtually weightless. I never noticed. How did he pull the switch? Before he could think too long on the matter, however, there was a strangled scream from the student who appeared to have tricked him. Naruto! Despite her apparent dislike of the boy, it seemed Sakura had her heart in the right place. Seeing Naruto's face drain to the pallor of a corpse and his body fold in on itself as a response to some pain she couldn't see, the girl was at his side in a heartbeat trying to inspect the damage. Kakashi started forwards as well, stepping past the still stunned Sasuke. Though even as he did so it appeared Konoha's #1 surprising ninja was recovering. There was a little more color in his cheeks and his breathing seemed to even out a little as he looked up and managed a grimacing smile. I just learned something, he shuddered again before continuing, about shadow clones. Really? Feigning boredom now the crisis appeared to be over, though his mind was racing a million miles a minute behind his mask. Kakashi examined his book again. What was that? When you dispel a shadow clone, Naruto continued in a labored tone, shaking like someone who'd either just run a marathon or had a little chat with Ibiki and Anko over a cup of tea and a hot branding iron. You'd get all its memories and experiences. So, stepping back as she realized there was nothing wrong with her teammate, Sakura folded her arms with a firm, if accepting expression. What's that got to do with anything? Naruto turned to look at her with a pained grin. This is awkward. Put it this way, Sakura-chan. If it had been me dangling like those bell clones were, I'd probably make the male star of Kakashi-sensei's porn book green with envy right about now. Kakashi paused, wiping his fingertips across the back of his jounin pants at this point as the majority of the Hokage's office winced and moaned from the sympathy pains from an important part of their anatomy. Unfortunately, Kurenai, not affected beyond a quirking of the eyebrow and a sudden smirk on her lips, spoke up. Really, might have to suggest that one to Anko sometime. Without meaning to, she saw several of the men around her wince again. Aoba almost turning green as he realized if that did happen he was going to be first in the firing line. But Naruto, he passed the bell test. Solo? It looked that way, the copy nin confirmed before seeming to remember something and looking at the Hokage. Hokage-sama. Would it be possible for you to summon Yumino Irika here? I need him to confirm a few things after this story is over. Sarutobi nodded, dispatching an Anbu to the task with a flick of his hand before looking over at Kakashi once more. He'll be here shortly, assuming they've let him off of the hospital probationary period yet. Anyway, continued Kakashi, I'm sure all of us here want to know how Naruto-kun pulled this one off. And that, Kakashi filled in with a deep eye smile and chuckle as he leant back against the wall, is a story well worth me telling. It took a few seconds to sink in, but when it did, it didn't take more than a split second for Sakura to sink her fist right into the helpless boy's cheek. You perverted baka. Hey ow, it wasn't my, fault. Naruto tried to defend himself as much as he was able to, writhing against the post to try and avoid Sakura's assault. Kakouchi-sensei picked them yuk. Sakura-chan. Kakashi decided to cut in at this point, his facade of boredom as rigid as ever as the pink-haired girl looked up at him, letting Naruto fall slack against the ropes as he tried desperately to breathe again. Don't kill your teammate, you might need him later on, especially as he managed to get both bells. How did you do that, Naruto? And I want the truth. Though the tone was light and words spoken almost in jest, Naruto had spent enough time around and running away from ninja to know a command when he heard it. Sucking down a second breath, the boy began his tale. Well, I started after you did that smoke disappearing thingy yesterday. You said about your test and I wanted to find out about it. So I went and asked Irika-sensei if he knew anything about you, said I owed him some ramen and wanted to say thanks for caring, after what happened with Mizuki team. Despite himself, Naruto smiled at the memory, though it was and probably always be bittersweet knowledge for him. So we went to see Ayam-chan and old man Tucci. He told me he couldn't tell me about your test, but he said you were always late and about the book you're always reading. He also said something else that caught my interest. Oh really? As the whiskered visage leant forwards to look at him directly, Kakashi raised his visible eyebrow, wondering what the scarred chunin could have told his adopted little brother. He told me that you've never passed a genin team before. At those words the temperature dropped several degrees, even the ice cube of the academy. The sculptured god Sasuke Uchiha shivered as that particular nugget of information was unearthed, though as usual it was water of a duck's back for Kakashi. And it's true, I never have, he mentioned as though commenting on the weather before dragging the conversation back on track. Though knowing this, what did you do then? Oh, that was easy, Naruto explained brightly. Jounin senseis always keep the same team number, so all I did was go back into the academy and trawl the records. I looked up the names of the previous Team 7 members you failed. Just out of luck I knew one of them, or at least I've heard the name, Kuruta Jozo. He's a civilian now, helps out at that clothing and cleaning store I turned neon orange about a month ago. I remember that one. The Hyuga were most upset you chose that particular day for a prank, not least because it was their washing day. I've never seen Haishir go as red as his daughter before, and in the middle of a council meeting too. Inuzuka-san might still be laughing now. He'd been on duty in the council meeting that day and was sure that the Hyuga clan head's expression as the branch family member whispered the message that most of the clan's traditionally white clothing was now glowing in the dark would never leave his memory. It was probably due to her, and some of the other clan heads having a sense of humor, that the execution order Haishir tried to put on you failed Naruto. True to form, the prankster in question was oblivious to his inner thoughts and instead merely glared at no one in particular. Well, that'll teach their gate guards to kick mud at me as I'm walking past, he muttered, though not low enough to evade Kakashi's chakra-enhanced hearing. But anyway, I knew where he was and I knew he'd know what your test was, so I went and asked him. The brass neck of the child in front of him almost made the copy-nin gape. It was something so far out of the bathtub that in an obscure way he was as surprised as he was disappointed that no one had thought of it before, himself included. Keeping such feelings to himself, he was surprised to hear the next question he had planned asked by a voice that wasn't his. But why would he want to talk to you? Despite her personal feelings for the boy in question, Sakura was naturally a curious person. You just said you'd pranked his business. I know I'd just kick you out on the street. And you wouldn't be the first, but much as I never thought I'd say this, being Uchiha smooths all paths. Before too much confusion could reign, Naruto seized the reins and explained, I knew Sasuke would just go home brooding after Sensei vanished. Kami knows it's all he did through the academy, so I hinged into him when I went in. Of course everyone just fell over themselves to answer what I wanted to know. Kuruta was singing like a bird and I got what I wanted to know like it was nothing. So this whole test, he shrugged again, sniggering a little at the violated look on Sasuke's face. I knew it was coming, and I made a plan for it. All I did was find out your address, Sensei, then I. How do you know that? As always when confronted by a threat to village security, Kakashi was pure business and killing intent. Where the jounin of this village live is classified information. Naruto shrugged. Henge again, walked into the postal section of the administration building, and before you say they should have seen through it, he shot down Sakura's question before she could ask it. My henges aren't like yours. I talked about it with Iruka-sensei. We figured out it must be because I've got so much chakra, like why I can't make regular clones. When I henge I actually change shape. It's not a genjutsu. Look, I'll show you. Don't hit me, Sakura-chan, he said apologetically before, with a puff of smoke, his girl form appeared. Modesty preserved by the ropes around her. See, in this form I'm actually a girl. Pull my hair. He, or she as he was claiming he was at the minute, nodded at the closest person and, dazed as much by the information as by a decently clad female version of Naruto appearing rather than the nude model that usually sent all men within eyeshot shooting backwards. At all sorts of interesting angles, Sakura complied, seizing the golden braid before her and giving a swift yank. Yow! Ow, I meant gently. With another puff of smoke Naruto returned, pouting at his longtime crush. That hurt, Sakura-chan. Yeah, sorry Naruto. The girl apologized before starting. That shouldn't happen. Henge is meant to be a genjutsu. Not for me, it's not, the boy confirmed, grinned back in place before he turned back to Kakashi a bit more seriously. But yes, I henged into a postal ninja I'd seen around town, ducked into the back office and scanned through the address book. I've done it before when I need to know where someone I needed to prank lived or worked. When I knew where to go, I went there and well, you left the window open. You broke in? Kakashi wasn't sure whether to be impressed, amused or angry. Why? Well, I knew what you were going to do and I had a plan to deal with it. I went in and, by the way, you need to work on your trap-making skills, he told the jounin solemnly. Kakashi raising an eyebrow as he did. If you want, can give you some pointers. Check the forest about half a mile north of here if you don't believe me. I am slowly but surely losing the will to live. Is it too late to go nuke-nin already? Kakashi just about resisted the temptation to slap his face into his palm at the genin who continued to show up, both him and the village at large. Naruto, I take it you got in without a problem then? Yep, they don't call me Uzumaki. Broke into the Hokage's tower and stole the forbidden scroll Naruto for nothing, he confirmed before wrapping up his tale. But you left the bells Kuruta mentioned on the table by your bed, so I swiped them and had 2 shadow clones henge to replace them. After that, it was just a case of making the plant on Sakura-chan and the team, though you made that bit easy, Kakashi-sensei. What was the jutsu you used on Sasuke? It looked really cool. Cool? The word echoed around the silent office like a gong of a funeral bell. He makes a monkey out of one of the elite jounin of the village and he calls it cool. No offense to Enma and the other pops. Asuma was quick to offer amends as memories of the last time he'd accidentally insulted the Monkey King rose up in his mind. A chastening experiencing it had been, a pleasant one it was not. Fortunately though, the Hokage seemed too preoccupied with trying hard not to copy what Inuzuka-sama had done a month ago and fall into hysteria in his chair, though the grin on his face was unmistakable as he looked up at the copy-nin. I should be surprised, but, knowing Naruto, somehow I'm not. the aged leader spoke mirthfully, looking around the assembled and seeing expressions that ranged from hold and gut-busting laughter to thunderstruck shock and, in the case of a recently arrived academy instructor, deep pride in a student. So, what happened then? It seems to me that whichever way you slice it, Naruto won. He got both the bells off you. True, but as I told, he didn't actually have them. This kid will go far. That thought was foremost in the copy ninja's mind as he beheld the roped-up form of his potential student. However, though Naruto had shown a lot of promise, and a mind of such devious cleverness, he was already making mental notes to ensure the jumpsuited shinobi was never introduced to Anko. It was now the other two members of the team he had to check had the right stuff for his squad. Very impressive for a so-called dead last, Kakashi commented mildly, smiling with his one visible eye before pointing to the bells on the floor and in Sasuke's hand. But at the minute you don't have one of the bells you stole, so it looks like you're the one going back to the academy. But Kakashi-sensei, she seems to have the team ethic after all. And even Sasuke seems to be coming around. Hope was stirring around in the pit of Kakashi's stomach as Sakura stepped forwards, almost in front of her blonde-haired teammate. He got both the bells. She hastily corrected herself, retracting the finger she'd been about to point at her living deity, and hanging her head as she carried on. I didn't do anything. Nothing like what Naruto and Sasuke-kun did. I should go back. Wait. Before anything else could be said, Naruto's shout had brought all the attention back to him and made Sakura jump a foot in the air and 3 feet backwards. Sakura-chan, please don't say that. Look, Kakashi-sensei. The masked Jounin looked up, putting his book in his equipment pouch as a mark of his sincerity to listen. I put the bells where they were for a reason. Mizuki team taught us all a lot at the academy, especially the taijutsu and survival sections. He taught me aside from the rest of the class a lot, because he looked away, face slowly reddening as he revealed how badly he'd been duped by the traitor. He said I needed help and he'd teach me different forms and different things from the others. But it was wrong, all of it. I was never any good in the academy spars and bottomed out the survival tests. And you just completely knocked 7 bells out of me just now. No pun intended. That got it. She's much prettier when she smiles and laughs, though even when she's hitting me she's cute. Naruto loved it when Sakura smiled, and he made sure it happened as often as possible when he was around, usually by clowning around or playing the fool that came so naturally to him. So I know I can't be a genin, not with skills like that. I'd be a liability, dangerous to my teammates because I couldn't defend myself properly. As a ninja, Kakashi respected many things. He respected honor, diligence, courage, skill, and fighting spirit. Out of all things though, out of respect for his deceased team and sensei, he respected a team player and Naruto. In saying those words as he just had, proved beyond all doubt in Kakashi's eyes that he would be the man to sacrifice anything, including his life and afterlife if necessary, to protect other people. For a brief instant the Jounin didn't trust his voice. In fact, it was an effort to zone in to listen to the rest of what Naruto was saying. Iruka-sensei and I talked about it while we were talking about you. He said that if I didn't make it this time he'd give me some one-on-one teaching to try and get me up to speed for next time. So I don't really want to pass now. I know I'm not really ready. Besides, in an instant his frown was banished and a smirk was back on his face. Could you imagine what would happen if I sent the team back? The council would pitch a fit, and once Sakura-chan got through with me there wouldn't be enough left to cremate, let alone bury. And as Kami is my witness, I'm not sending Sakura-chan back. Unless you want to end up dragging Sasuke team back from a D-rank mission in a body bag. They'd make a better team together than I would with either of them. Kakashi did nothing for a moment. He knew there was nothing he could do now. There was too much here to cover. Much as he wanted to pass this team, he knew these diamonds were too rough to cut it at the minute, even the supposed genius Uchiha. But at the same time, there was so much he could do with them after a little more polish had been applied. He needed time to think about this, and he couldn't do it in front of these genin. In the circumstances, he made the only decision that made any sense to him at the minute. Naruto yelped as he kunai buried itself in the ropes by his side. Cut him free and go home, all of you. Report here at 9 tomorrow morning and do not be late. I'm not sure what to do with you all and haven't yet decided if you've passed, but you'll know tomorrow. Know this though, everyone looked up, even Sakura from where she was trying to saw Naruto loose. Pass or fail, you've come closer than anyone I've ever tested. With that, he gave an eye smile and vanished in smoke. I didn't leave, of course. I was in the trees to see what happened next. It was quite interesting. The copy-nin spoke with his chin in his hand. Seemingly ignorant of the thunderstruck expressions of his audience, Sakura got him loose and hugged him until he turned blue, and Sasuke, the eye smile was back in place. He threw him his bell. Dobe or not, you earned this, I think were his exact words. But all that aside, what do you think I should do with them? There was no answer for a moment, and Kakashi wasn't surprised. It was not too great to have a genin surprise a jounin with a particular skill or trick in these tests, but to hear a genin openly admit his deficiencies as Naruto had done was a rare occurrence indeed. It was only when the Hokage himself, after wiping what looked to be wet eyes on the sleeve of his ceremonial robes, spoke that the silence was broken completely. The will of fire burns brightly in that boy, the flames of youth too, as Guy would say. The mention of the noble green beast of Konoha snapped everyone else out of their stupor, and brought several flesh-crawling cringes that brought a smirk to the old man's lips. Before he continued, before I make any suggestions though, I take it you have a solution, Kakashi? The copy-nin nodded. With your permission, Lord Hokage, I would give them a deferred pass, if you will. Before anyone could interject, he'd outlined his plan. 6 months back at the academy to iron out their flaws, and then I'll take them on. No need for any further tests or anything like that. For this to work though, I'll need your help, Irika-san. Finding himself addressed by a superior ninja, the chunin snapped to attention. What do you need, Kakashi-san? While they're at the academy, they'll need specific training. Naruto already knows his weaknesses and you know how to address them. If you need any further help, post him off to Guy. That'll make or break him. Kakashi gave his customary youthful shudder at this point as memories of his eternal rival broke over him like a cold sweat. Sakura needs serious physical fitness training and someone to kick her out of being little more than a doormat for the Uchiha. Kurenai, would you and Enko-san care to oblige? The kunoichi knitted her delicate brows for a minute before a predatory smile broke over her face. Oh, definitely, send her my way after our team training, and Enko will see her whenever her schedule allows. If that doesn't do it, nothing will. What about the Uchiha? Teamwork and shinobi ethics, Kakashi said simply, folding his arms. I've known Uchiha in the past, and it was tragic what happened to them when Itachi went rogue. But Sasuke must learn he is not special. He will not be able to defeat Itachi alone, and the Sharingan is nothing more than a tool. A powerful one, granted, but a tool nonetheless. Well said, Kakashi. I see no reason for this approach not to be adopted, and I would be grateful to have you active in the ranks for a while longer. The number of missions has increased since the Wind Lord approached us again. The Hokage reasoned before a sudden thought occurred to him. Before that though, the matter of Naruto's traps. You did see them, I assume? That brought a chuckle from the elite jounin. I did. The reason I didn't arrive here early, in fact. That boy is a trapmaker extraordinaire. Almost tagged me a few times when I wandered into the area he pointed out. Took me about 3 shadow clones, a few substitutions and almost all my shuriken and kunai just to get out of there alive. Give him a patch of ground and some basic ninja tools and you've got a nasty terrain piece to deal with. Just as well he didn't have any explosive notes on him at the time. Irika smirked at this, as did several of the other jounin who'd seen the #1 prankster of Konoha at work through the years. True in that if nothing else the student has surpassed his teacher, the scarred man said with pride suffusing his tone. By your leave, Hokage-sama. I shall go and plan the remedial classes for those who didn't make it this time. Very well, in fact I believe that concludes this year's Genin selection. Congratulations to the new jounin sensei and one jounin sensei to be. Good luck to you all, you are dismissed. The assembled jounin, and Irika, bowed slightly and made to leave before they were all stopped by a sudden bellow of laughter. Looking over to see Aoba doubled over and heaving with hysteria, the Hokage raised an eyebrow. Something wrong, Aoba-san? Unusually, as despite his joking nature Aoba was an exemplary shinobi, the jounin ignored his superior and stumbled towards Irika. The chunin had the look of a deer in the headlights as the taller man came to an ungainly halt in front of him, and bowed deeply. Irika, he has surpassed all of us, Hokage-sama. The man collapsed against his leader's desk, apparently heedless of his forehead protector grinding into the squelchy morass of damp paperwork that had accumulated. Looking up at the older man with tear pouring from his eyes, let me take him. Please let me take him on outside of missions when the academy's out. My team didn't pass and I'd kill for a shinobi like him to train. Oh, the TI department wouldn't know what hit them. I'd have Enko on her knees and begging us to stop in a week. Surprise wasn't something Sarutobi was used to feeling, but he got over it with admirable haste and reasserted his authority over this bizarre situation. Aobi-san, control yourself and explain. Trying to comply, the jounin stood up, coughing into a hand that failed to hide how broad his grin was, and looked across at where Kakashi, who'd been leaving through the window as he usually did, was once more leaning against the door. Hi Hokage-sama, but I think a visual demonstration is in order. Kakashi-san, the named ninja looked up at his name. You got tagged. In a big way you got tagged. Turn around. Stupidly. As the copy-nin would later berate himself, Kakashi did just that. As the entire room behind him simply dissolved into giggles, he realized immediately something was up. Turning back around to see all his peers in various stages of mirth and laughter, the former ANBU captain raised an eyebrow and reached behind his back. His spine froze when it came into contact with paper. No, it can't be. All those traps, all to try and prank me? With a tug he dislodged the slip from his back and brought it up in front of him, only to go suddenly pale and silent, swear a bloody, furious revenge against the prankster known as Uzumaki Naruto. It was a piece of paper framing a photograph that had been stuck onto it with tape. A photograph that Kakashi had sworn would never see the light of day as long as he was alive. In it, sitting in a high chair and staring at the camera with an apparently affronted expression, was a baby with short, sticking up silver hair and what looked like chocolate smeared liberally all over his lower face and both hands, hiding the features completely. It was the baby photo from hell, and Kakashi knew there was only one way Naruto could have gotten hold of it. Looks like he didn't just check out my bedside table during his impromptu smash and grab job. Though the caption underneath the picture was definitely original. Pudding or no pudding, the mask stays on. 6 months Irika, Aoba. The whisper sliced through the atmosphere of laughter and piled up bodies. Even if the way Kurenai had fallen against hate and was almost crying into his shoulder from laughing so hard was certainly suggestive. The elite jounin was feeling far too bloody-minded to mention it as he made his dire promise of a lifetime. 6 months to train Uzumaki Naruto, then his ass is mine. Films rolling and the show's a go. Enjoy, folks. Deception is the way of the ninja. If an opponent believes you to be an idiot and an incompetent, he'll be most surprised when you reveal your full potential, and surprises, especially those involving kunai, shuriken, jutsus or impressive taijutsu of any kind, have a nasty habit of being very fatal for those involved. In following this line of thinking, there was one true exponent of the ideal of deception, though he had recently taken on a pupil who he hoped would follow in his footsteps as soon as he actually developed the skills to back up his ridiculous exterior. Regardless of his follower, however, everyone who had ever met him would immediately agree that, bumbling fool and lech though he might have appeared to be, in the middle of a life or death struggle there was no one you'd want on your side more than Jiraiya of the Sannin. An example of the Toad Sage's idiocy was his sleeping habits. As Naruto continually complained on a daily basis, it generally took nothing less than an exploding tag in each earhole to get the old pervert moving in the morning. However, Jiraiya was a ninja and had from a very young age developed a hair-trigger sense of getting up and out in the blink of an eye, though this was more out of indulging his vices than any formal training despite Sarutobi-sensei's best efforts. More than one brothel madam, innocent servant, or irate father had blundered into a comely young lady's room in time to catch a glimpse of Jiraiya's half-naked backside rapidly vacating the premises, through a convenient window. He chose to play possum in the morning simply because he had the choice to and liked to sleep in, not to mention it wound his student up something chronic, and that was a good enough reason both in and of itself. However, given the appropriate stimulus, the Gamma Sannin was guaranteed to be combat-ready in an instant. A girly shriek of terror echoing through the night more than counted as an appropriate stimulus. Naruto. He hadn't been there for his godson's early life, but he'd be damned if he screwed it up now. Minato's legacy would become the legend the Yellow Flash had always said he would be, or Jiraiya swore he would throw himself into the Shinigami's stomach to let the Yondaime kick his ass willingly with a smile on his face. Throwing himself out of his sleeping bag and not even bothering to take the large toad-shaped sleeping cap off his head, a habit, he noted with equal parts hilarity and pride, that Naruto seemed to have taken up even from a young age. The older nin sprinted towards the source of the cry, inwardly cursing at the same time as trying to work out why Naruto would have snuck out to train again. Had yesterday's brush with Akatsuki taught him nothing? He'd nearly been captured by Itachi and Kisame. Only dumb luck and lots of it had saved both him and Sasuke from death, or, in the Jinchuriki's case, a fate worse than death according to the report Guy had gasped at him prior to dragging a chagrined Sasuke back to Konoha. Stupid Gaki. The Toad Sage berated himself before focusing on the matter at hand. If it's one of the Red Dawn, I will make sure the sun goes down on them this day, huh? What's that? Stumbling to a halt, the ninja master focused more chakra to his ears and listened into the conversation he could hear his student having. Realizing Naruto was not in danger anymore, Jiraiya began to plot ways of making him pay for losing precious minutes of sleep at the same time as try to figure out who the fox-containing boy was taking to. Oh, okay, you're not slicing me, that's good, right? You need more. No problem, I got plenty to spare. If these are his pickup lines, he needs more help than I can give him. The thought made the Toad Sage smile before listening in again. Though in the realms of womanly affection, there is no greater master than the legendary Jiraiya. Man, did that guy ever feed you? No wonder you went for me. It must have been like throwing a starving Akimichi into an all-you-can-eat barbecue buffet. Okay, that's enough. Deciding to announce himself before things could go too far, Jiraiya strode into the small clearing Naruto must have found for himself and his lady friend, one hand pushing the ferns and branches out the way while the other fingered his trusty notepad, just in case. Gaki, you have a lot to learn about wooing the fairer sex, if that was the... It was at that point Jiraiya looked over at the source of the soft giggling he'd heard earlier, and all the words died in his throat. The sight of some hideous, spiky thing resting across his student's lap was enough to make him wince, even if it didn't appear to be doing the boy any harm. Looking up in alarm, Naruto calmed down when he saw the flabbergasted form of the older ninja. Hey Ero-sennin, he greeted casually. Oh sweet Kami, that thing can move. Seeing the monster shift its bulbous, spined head as though sniffing him out made Jiraiya feel queasy, almost ill enough to miss the last of his student's statement. Sorry if I woke you up earlier, but it's okay now. I think she likes me. With that, Naruto simply ran his free hand over some of the spines on the back of this beast's back, and Jiraiya swore he could see the thing sigh at the caress. Tearing his eyes from the disturbing spectacle, the Toad Sage grated his next words. Explain, now. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the request, and the gesture was enough to break Jiraiya's fragile temper. What the hell is that thing, and where did it come from? Hehehe. Seeing the traditional Naruto grin and back of the head scratch, Jiraiya groaned and slapped a hand over his face. He'd seen that look before and it never boded. Well, yesterday I may have told a little fib. Well, tell me the truth now. His mentor sighed, knowing it was no use getting angry and crying over spilt milk now. I'm not angry, but I'm curious. In that case, get your notebook out, Ero-sennin. To his surprise, Naruto, rather than shrinking and mumbling his report like he usually did when he'd done something wrong, he was grinning wider than ever and stroking the beast on his leg with more vigor than before. It's moving, I swear that thing can scuttle. What the hell is it? This'll make your next porn novel a bestseller. Believe it. Naruto was naturally a cheerful person, but that didn't mean he wasn't also naturally cautious. Years of living in a village where people treat you, at best, as a walking natural disaster waiting to happen will breed a streak of paranoia in even the most sunshine-filled soul. That same streak had been subconsciously pinging away ever since he and Jiraiya had come to this town, had really started sounding alarm bells when the Toad Sage had left to go chasing Tail, and, now that he'd sensed 2 of the largest chakra presences he'd ever felt heading straight towards the room he'd rented in Jiraiya's name, it was screaming at him to do something drastic. The only problem was that, in the face of a rising panic, right now his mind was a blank. Oh shit, oh hell, I'm too young to see Sandangiji again. Part of the reason he'd agreed to go on this mission had been to make his adopted grandfather proud of him wherever Sarutobi was in the afterlife. It had hurt to be at the old man's graveside, but that pain had been tempered by the knowledge that he was going to recruit the Sandame's successor, and that the old man had gone out protecting his village, and had crippled the man who'd killed him almost beyond repair. The image of the kind old teacher helped calm him somewhat as he breathed rapidly, trying to figure out what to do next. They're ninja. They've got to be, and the only person I've met with bigger chakras than them is Erosenin. They'd got to be after me. No way they'd come here first if they were after him. What do? I can't outfight them, and the second I try to run they'll be all over me like bugs on Shino and fleas on Kiba. Out of desperation and the knowledge that he needed any kind of an edge here, he triggered chakra to his ears like Kakashi had taught him and listened, drowning out the pain as other noises of life battered his heightened senses to listen in. Focus, I know it hurts, but focus. Wait, I know that voice, but it's not him, so it has to be. The knowledge he was listening to one of the Leaf's most infamous traitor Nin filled him with dread, even more so when there was a polite knock on the door, and he knew who waiting for him behind the simple plank of wood. But even as he stood there, the fear began to drain away. An idea, a truly crazy, mad idea dredged up from the very depths of his desperation to survive bloomed in his mind, and he broke the shackles of terror on his limbs. After all, he decided with a shrug as he smiled shyly and decided he didn't have anything better to go on at the minute, so he'd give this a go. After all, winding up Uchiha was one of Naruto's pet hobbies at home, and if nothing else it might give whoever was with Itachi a good laugh before the missing Nin killed him in a suitably brutal and stomach-churning manner. Come on, Itachi. The massive blue-skinned half-shark made a concerted attempt to sound wheedling. Just one leg? No, came the monotone reply, the Uchiha turning his head just enough to see the Kiri missing Nin from the corner of his eye. If we damage the vessel we may damage the bijou, and make the sealing process even more arduous. Grinning at the same time as hefting his infamous blade over his shoulder, Kisame smirked as his partner knocked on their next victim's door. But where's the fun in life if it's not a challenge? I hate getting bored. After the QB is taken we will request another bijou, one in an experienced host. That should give you enough of a challenge. Hearing the door open, the former Leaf Nin turned towards the Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto. You will come with us now. There was a long moment of silence, one that Itachi had expected. After all, their target was only a boy of the Leaf, an unusually strong one it was true, but still a boy likely stunned into shock to stand in the presence of such an infamous figure in the Leaf's history. Realizing he wasn't going to get an answer, Itachi sighed softly and reached forwards to grab his target before the paralysis wore off. Dude, do you have any idea how creepy that sounded? Itachi blinked, his hand frozen as it appeared their roles were reversed. Suddenly the genin before him was animated and he was stood as still as stone, only able to listen as Naruto went on. Come on, asking a young boy to come with you, man, that sounds like something Orochimaru would try to pull. He's always giving them gifts, it must be a Nin thing. All the powerful Nin I know have got something wrong with them. Ero-sennin's a pervert, Kakashi-sensei's a pervert, and he's always late. Guy-sensei's always running around screaming about youth and Orochimaru. He seemed to shudder at the thought of the snake Nin. Let's not go there. Is that it? The secret to power is to let out your inner pervert, slacker or other vices and bang, all of a sudden you're Sannin level? Kisame's shoulders started to shake. Naruto carried on, seemingly oblivious to his audience while internally he was both praying for Jiraiya to get his act together and pull off a dramatic rescue and praying neither of the two missing Nins looked over his shoulder to see what a couple of his clones were up to in the room. It must be me. I must have a sign over my head or something that says Uchiha lover. Sasuke's just the same. Itachi's eyes widened at the mention of the brother he'd abandoned, but before he could get a word in edgeways Naruto had simply steamrollered over him. Still, I guess I should have seen this coming, he sighed melodramatically, ever second precious to him as he carried on. He takes after you in so many ways. You know, tall, dark, brooding and the personality of a half-brick in a sock. I suppose it's only natural his tastes develop similar to yours. Kisame was forced to turn his back on the scene. Man, is this guy made of porcelain or something? It was working on the taller of the two as far as Naruto can see and hear, the muffled snorts of laughter coming from the back of the broad cloak giving the game away there. But Itachi seemed unmoved and Naruto was starting to sweat as he was starting to run out of material. He reached back into his mind for something else to go for and internally praying for a miracle when, just for once in his life, Kami took pity on him and sent an angel of mercy to guide him in this time of need. Itachi. Today is the day I avenge our clan. Thank you, Sasuke. There was a first time for everything, and gratitude for the team of his class was definitely a first for Naruto. Right now, though, he was desperate enough to take what he could get, and to that end, before this whole thing devolved into fisticuffs and both he and Sasuke got their collective behinds beaten black and blue, he slapped a palm over his eyes and turned back towards Itachi, his tone long-suffering and tired. See what I mean? Even after leaving Konoha I can't get rid of him. You know, Sasuke, After dragging his hand down his face, he let his voice rise and cut through the younger Uchiha's posturing. If you keep chasing after me, people are really going to wonder if you're serious about resurrecting your clan. I can help with your ninja skill, your eating habits, blasphemer against the ramen gods that you are, and hell, I could even have a go at changing your warm and sunny personality. However, I draw the line at us attempting procreation. It'll take a lot more than you copying and using my sexy jutsu for me to see you as anything more than just a friend. By now Kisame was leaning on the wall opposite him, hunched over and hammering on the plasterboard with unreleased laughter juddering through his body. As Sasuke stood thunderstruck in the hallway, even his hatred for his brother buried under the shock of his blonde teammate's insinuations, Naruto capitalized on his advantage and looked Itachi directly in the eye. In shock, the Uchiha had failed to activate his Sharingan. I don't blame you. In fact, I'm flattered, and I'll even admit it as a casual observer. You both really pull off the Bishonen look. You really make it work well for you, but it just doesn't do anything for me. Sorry to break your heart like this, but still, look on the bright side. There are other fish in the sea. Ah, no offense, began Blue. Even if Kisame heard him, the shark man was too far gone in holding back an outright breakdown into hysterics for the comment to register. You'll find the right person eventually. Just keep those red eyes open and a sexy pout on your lips and whammo. They'll be under your spell the second they let you get close enough. For now though, I've had a rough day, so I'm going back to bed. With that, he slammed the door shut, nodded to his clones and began to frantically prepare his survival plan for the next few minutes. Well, that was unique. Seeing the target quite literally shut the door on him like that was a first for the elder of the Uchiha siblings. Though he discounted the Jinchuriki's earlier comments as false. Truly you are Konoha's #1 surprising ninja Uzumaki Naruto. And there is the other annoyance to deal with as well. From the corner of his eye he could see his younger brother, still as foolish as he had been all those years ago, overcoming his surprise and getting ready to attack. Swiftly analyzing the situation and reminding himself that murdering your partner was much frowned upon in the Akatsuki, even if said partner was currently bluer than usual in the face and biting holes in his cloak to stop himself laughing, Itachi made his commands. Kisame, detain the target while I deal with Sasuke. My brother requires another lesson. For a second he was unsure if the Kuririn heard him, but as Kisame stood up tall and rubbed his eyes with his free hand, he was relieved to see the taller man nod his consent. Damn, the former member of the Seven Swordsmen shook his head as one hand curled around the handle of Samehada. As corny as this sounds, I really am going to regret this. Too true, kid should have been a court jester rather than a nin. Can't remember the last time I had a laugh like that. With the memory of the recent monologue running through his mind, the half-shark brought his leg back and casually booted the door in, sending splinters everywhere. Unfortunately, distracted as he was by his current good mood, it never even crossed Kisame's mind that his target might have taken precautions to defend himself, and he therefore left himself open to the attack that hit him full in the face. As any good prankster should, Naruto always kept a scroll full of his pranking material close at hand. After all, you never knew when inspiration for a really good prank would strike, and there was nothing more frustrating than having the perfect plan mapped out in front of you but nothing to pull it off with. As Kisame cleared the threshold of the hotel room, he found this out the hard way as a balloon filled with ink caught him full in the mush and burst open. Though when diluted in water the ink was harmless, Naruto never intentionally incorporated anything that would hurt in his pranks just in case he hit the wrong person. Concentrated, it was a nasty skin irritant. It also didn't do much for the eyes either if the way Kisame suddenly howled like a baby and clutched a hand to his face was anything to go by. Casually deflecting Sasuke's rage-empowered blow with his elbow, Itachi had to catch himself from sighing and wondering what else was going to go wrong on this mission. That's it, kid, I'm ripping your legs off. Former funny comments forgotten, Kisame raged as he took wild one-handed swings with his weapon. Naruto ducked under one of the Sharkman's blows and made some hand seals that were immediately swallowed up by Itachi's revealed Sharingan. You're looking a bit green around the gills there. Had he not been slightly preoccupied with dodging and parrying his brother's offense, Itachi would have groaned at the lame pun at the same time as applaud the blonde shinobi for being able to throw his voice like that to confuse and misdirect his blinded opponent. Clear the decks. Medical emergency. We've got a sick shark here. There's a puff of smoke that quickly cleared to reveal a female Naruto clad in a nurse outfit that left little to the imagination. A henge. But why? Itachi pondered the question as he casually caught his brother's lightning-encased fist and punched just above his elbow with his free hand, deadening Sasuke's arm and dispersing the technique. He caught his younger brother by the collar and hefted him from the floor in time to hear the last of Naruto's words. Nurse Naruko to the rescue. Calm down, Kisame-san. Be a good boy and you might get a lollipop. The Sharkman bellowed in rage, the noise making both Uchiha brothers look over at the ongoing fight and forget their quarrel for a minute. Forget the legs, everything below the waist is getting fed to Samehada, piece by piece. Now calm down. Itachi wondered for a minute why Naruto had given away his position by not throwing his voice again. When the answer arrived a second later, however, he found himself regretting his curiosity. I said, the henge boy hopped back, the tip of the legendary blade ruffling the midriff of her uniform before dodging back inside Kisame's swing. Cool off. There is a school of thought in the ninja world that states emotions make a shinobi weak. However, Konoha as a majority did not subscribe to this belief and therefore taught its children to experience all the emotions life can bring. In addition, many emotions such as fear, rage and anger, to say nothing of the desire to protect something you love, can empower anyone to heights they never dreamed they could tap. Hyuga Hinata's performance in the chunin exams, gaining a glancing hit on her seemingly invincible prodigy of a cousin to prove herself to the one she fanned a flame for, was proof enough of that. Sasuke's hatred for the man that had massacred his family was another, albeit darker, font of strength he could draw from. But regardless of the depths of his hatred, there are some experiences even more primal, causing such bonding between humans of the same sex that they can smother all emotions and force even mortal enemies to react in a set, predetermined pattern. Therefore it should have been no surprise to anyone involved that when Uzumaki Naruto's hinged foot landed with surgical precision in Hoshigaki Kisame's groin, 2/3 of the remaining Sharingan eyes in the world simultaneously watered in sympathy for the misnin. Sasuke even winced and added a small ode to the proceedings. Kisame for his part simply collapsed, Samehada clattering to the floor as the misnin's face went from ocean blue to swamp water green, both his eyes and mouth open to their fullest extent. Both hands grabbing the new sun of pain that had eclipsed all other sensations in his world. He fell to his knees and came eye to streaming eye with the one responsible for this agony. There, that wasn't so bad, she grinned before leaning forwards. Now stick out your tongue and say I'm gonna kill you, kid. The threat would have sounded more impressive if the one administering it wasn't talking in a voice that would have put a falsetto choir girl to shame. Seeing his partner incapacitated in such a below-the-belt manner, literally as well as figuratively, Itachi felt his patience finally snap. Casually flinging Sasuke over Kisame's head and into the room, the Leaf Trader seized the hinged Naruto by the back of her uniform and brought her up to eye level, Sharingan spinning and morphing into the deadly Manjika form. No, put me down, bad bishi, Naruto scolded before seeing the transformation of Itachi's eyes and grabbing for her top, yanking it downwards. Oh, flash no jutsu. Itachi would have scoffed, and claimed he was immune to such a crass technique. But the fact of the matter was that he was a man. He had urges that most of the time he suppressed very well, and it was a very convincing henge Naruto had come up with. A combination of these reasons meant that for an instant, his eyes were diverted from their original target. He had just enough time to notice the small strip of paper nestled between a relatively generous bosom before the tag went off and the world turned white. Sasuke had been caught in the brightness as well, but, as he'd been trying to recover his breath and had his eyes half shut, to say nothing of the fact he was partially shielded behind Kisame's still kneeling bulk, meant he was only dazzled by the tag rather than blinded by it. He still felt battered and lightheaded from the lack of air but pushed himself upright regardless, hatred alone forcing him upright. Now was the chance to kill his brother, regardless of Naruto's interference. He glanced across, palming for a kunai, just in time to see the figure dropped by Itachi's reeling form vanish in smoke before he felt himself move against his will, as though someone had wrapped a thin twine around his waist and given it a hard yank. What, where Thea? Gravity being the annoyance it was, Sasuke found himself falling down the side of a building with no idea how he'd got there. Instinct took over and he adhered to the nearby surface with chakra, just in time to see another Naruto grab his hand and whisper urgently. His clones. He must have pulled me out the building with a substitution jutsu. Can you run? Yes, but there was a sudden pull on his wrist, and he was nearly jerked off his feet again. Then do it. That tag won't keep them busy for long, and either of them could kill us blinded anyway. But the bright dots imposed on his vision were playing tricks on his, as it looked like Naruto had to wrestle a shiny white something into a pouch of his before carrying on. Itachi is going to be really pissed off when he can see again. Naruto cut him off as he jumped the last 6 feet to the floor, looking around for the next way to run. He just owned you now, even with Chidori. You think he'll give you a chance now he's just been pranked? That was a valid point. Despite his pride, Sasuke was intelligent enough to know when he was beaten, though the fact his brother had defeated him so effortlessly was a bitter pill from him to swallow. Still, his eyesight was mostly regained. He was in a position to run. There was just an annoyingly large green blob that had attached itself to the left, and was moving forward slowly, heading towards the lobby of the hotel they just abandoned. In fact, now that he saw it clearer, it looked like something he remembered, a lot like Gai-sensei. The Jounin looked up just as Naruto turned around, still straining at Sasuke's hand to get him moving again. Next second the two of them were moving together faster than either of them could have moved alone. Forsaking stealth for speed, Guy had seen the target he'd been sent to retrieve and took off, grabbing a boy in each hand and tearing for the outskirts of the town to put some distance between Naruto and the two who were hunting him. Buildings blurred past and the wind howled in his ears as the taijutsu master ran and didn't look back, as preoccupied with his route and dodging civilians as his new charges were with keeping the last meals contained below their esophaguses. None of the three hearing as, from the building they just abandoned, a final roar of mingled rage and shock echoed across the town. Guy hadn't stopped running for hours, setting a furious pace away from the little town Naruto had come into earlier that day and stopping only when the sun was starting to set. Looking back with his chest heaving, the Leaf Jounin set his charges down. Yash, that should be enough to lose them. Either Sasuke nor Naruto were in a fit state to answer. The nausea of the high-speed trip had made both boys lose their lunch, breakfast, and was currently delving for last night's supper. Now we must hope our flames of youth burn bright enough to light the way for Jiraiya-sama to find us. No need, Naruto managed to croak out after flopping onto his back. Tracking seal, in my sock, he'll find us. There was a sudden ribbit from the side of him as a frog hopped into the clearing. A second later, all three watched on as a hand, then an arm, Then the rest of Jiraiya emerged slimily from the toad's innards. Even Guy looked grossed out by that one, though he managed to avoid disgracing himself like Sasuke and Naruto did. Sorry about that, but I had to get here fast," the sage apologized before his voice took on a hard edge and he folded his massive arms. "Naruto, what happened back there?" The Gaki shot him a filthy glare and pouted. "Because you had to go out researching, I had to get away from his." He jerked a hand towards Sasuke, older brother, a big blue mist called Kisame. That got a response. For a minute he thought his current teacher would faint, but Jiraiya managed to keep his composure and merely asked, "How?" "Clones in a flash tag," Naruto shot back shortly. "Then me and Sasuke pegged it out of there before they recovered and ran into Gai-sensei. He got us here." Unusually the Jounin merely nodded, face serious, as Jiraiya finally seemed to notice the Uchiha in the party. "Sasuke, what are you doing here anyway?" "Itachi and his partner were in Konoha. Kakashi is in hospital because of them. I knew he was following you, so I followed him to avenge my clan." Jiraiya considered this for a minute, finger on his chin, before nodding at the Uchiha. "I understand. He just left it long enough to let the Uchiha look smug before delivering the cutting line, 'You are an idiot.'" Naruto had to clamp a hand over his mouth at the expression of his teammate as Jiraiya tore into him. "You wanted to take on Itachi Uchiha, the man who destroyed an entire clan of ninja in one night, as a genin with one, maybe two, jutsu over B rank? That's not a plan for anything other than suicide. Itachi does not care how skilled you think you are, or even that he's your brother. If you get in his way, he will kill you. Get it through your head. You are not strong enough to even think about taking on a water clone of Itachi yet. You need years of training and a backup team before you can try to avenge your kin." But nothing, this time Naruto spoke, surprising those involved and making Sasuke curl his lip derisively. "Look team, back there you got the hell beaten out of you. I got us out of there and I'm the only reason we got out of there, right or wrong?" Sasuke glowered at the reminder but eventually had to confess. "Right. Okay, progress. Want to know how I did that? How I pulled one over on your brother? It's easy, I didn't do what he told me to do. I did something different, and it caught him flat-footed. Exactly what you haven't been doing all these years." "What did he say, Sasuke, on that night? What did he tell you to do?" "I know he said something. It was chucked around the academy enough, and some of the others there had family in high places." The last loyal Uchiha said nothing for a minute but seemed to be thinking over Naruto's words. This in itself was a sign of progress as far as the blonde was concerned, as he suspected Sasuke hadn't taken a blind bit of notice of anything he'd said for the past 14 or so years. The onyx-eyed child looked away but eventually spoke in a grating whisper. "Hate," his answer began. "He said to hate him and grow strong, then I could stand before him when I had the same eyes he did." "And you believed him?" Naruto slapped his forehead. It was either that or he was certain he'd slapped Sasuke. "For Kami's sake, they call me a dope. Just think about this, Sasuke, use that genius brain of yours. Itachi kills your clan and leaves you, a potential rival, right? So what's he going to do to make sure you don't grow into a threat to him? How about tell you exactly what not to do in the hope you're dumb enough to listen to him?" And guess what? He was right. You've swallowed the crap he told you without even thinking about it, and it's led you to this. He gestured with his hand, measuring the Uchiha up and down, rushing in without thinking, trying to take on a superior opponent from the front with an assassination jutsu. The clues in the title genius. Just suddenly he felt tired, exhausted by what he'd just done and the fact that he got away with it. He did not have time to put up with Sasuke now. "Go back to Konoha. We'll bring back this Tsunade and heal up Kakashi. Just remember this though, if you keep listening to Itachi and using hatred to grow strong, eventually someone or something." He pointed towards a spot on the other boy's neck. Sasuke, reflexively flinching to cover up the cursed seal of Orochimaru, "is going to tempt you away from Konoha. When that happens, someone is going to have to stop you leaving, and that will probably have to be me." Sasuke would have scoffed at this. Naruto had been lucky earlier. That was the only reason he was still alive. On an equal footing, Sasuke knew he would crush the Uzumaki into paste all day long. However, looking into the eyes suddenly full of a brilliant blue fire, backed up with a will that simply did not know how to say the word quit, the loyal Uchiha found himself a little less sure of his victory than he would have liked as the other ninja finished his impromptu speech. "Don't make me choose between my friend and my village, Sasuke." Naruto's words were calm and measured, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. "Because I'm not sure what my answer would be." Sasuke wasn't sure what to say to that, so said nothing, merely shrugging and not reacting as Guy put a hand on his shoulder tentatively. "Come Sasuke-kun, we have to go back to Konoha now." Sasuke nodded before, just as he was about to turn away, he paused unexpectedly. "Hey Dobe." Naruto looked up at his unofficial name, for the save back there. Sasuke knew this was going to hurt, but he could do nothing but try to stomach his pride this time around. "Thanks." Now that was unexpected. Naruto honestly couldn't remember the last time Sasuke had apologized to him, or to anyone else for that matter, but he'd take what he could get and decided to leave it at that. "Anytime team, it's what friends are for after all. Anyway, when you get back tell Sakura-chan I'm okay, and we'll be back with Ero-sennin's teammates soon." Sasuke nodded and wordlessly turned towards Guy, dogging the older man's footsteps as the green beast of Konoha started making tracks back towards the Leaf Village. Naruto watched them go before turning to Jiraiya, fingering something in one of his pouches before looking up at the sage. "So, was she worth it?" That wasn't the first question the Gamma Sennin had anticipated. "Huh, The girl, Naruto explained with a long-suffering air, you know, the one you were after while I was taking care of a couple of S-ranked nuknins. Oh her, well, Jiraiya thought it prudent not to mention to his student that he'd been had by a genjutsu cast over the woman. The last thing he needed now was to give Naruto any more ammunition after the boy had just done his protection job for him. Yes, she was a rare beauty, but as soon as I heard of your distress I had to leave her and come running to your save the fiction for your Ika arrow senin. There was a sudden thump, followed by a yelp of pain. I don't care how many nuknins you run away from, stop calling me that. So, Jiraiya hadn't written a word down but it didn't matter. He was certain this story was one he was never going to forget for the rest of his life. You're telling me you managed to escape, with your teammate, from 2 S-rank missing nins, including probably the strongest traitor to ever come out of Konoha, using a couple of shadow clones, a balloon filled with ink, a flash tag and your sexy jutsu? Naruto nodded at the succinct summary. Pretty much, he commented breezily, one hand continually caressing one of the spines of the creature still draped over his lap. Hearing the thing sigh again at the attention, Jiraiya pointed his pen at the still nameless monster. So how does is it growling at me? Noticing the change in pitch, Naruto's face grew hard. Probably. Oh, he said, an air of annoyance about him as he flicked one of the spines sharply. No growling at Arrow Senin, he's a friend. Suitably chastised, the thing seemed to settle back down, though Jiraiya had a suspicion it was somehow keeping an eye on him as Naruto spoke again. Both hands behind his head and a pleased grin on his face. Happened when I dragged Sasuke out the room. After all, Kisame had just threatened to chop my legs off, so I thought, he'll have a hard job if he's got nothing to cut with. Oh no, not even he would. Jiraiya had a sinking feeling in his gut that only got worse as his student's smile broadened. So I made a second clone and had it substitute at the same time the other one did with Sasuke. Managed to seal her into a scroll while he was still blinking spots out his eyes. Okay, he spoke to the thing on his lap. Enough for now. Back to what you used to be. The Toad Sage was so desperate for his guess to be wrong, but, as the spikes receded and fanged grin seemed to melt together into another, more recognizable form, he buried his face in his hands and despaired. Samehada. Ashen-faced, he looked up at his pupil again, not believing Naruto would do something so simultaneously brilliant and stupid. You stole, Samehada, Naruto. Do you know what that sword even is? I know it was hungry, the blonde shinobi said nonchalantly as he stood up. Poor thing, no wonder it ate everyone's chakra like there was no tomorrow. Kisame must have kept her starving on purpose to do that. Now I owe him another kick in the nuts. Having said his piece, the Hokage grabbed the handle of his new weapon and, with a grunt of effort, placed it awkwardly on his shoulder before looking at his mentor. Coming Arrow Senin. I'm a bit tired, Samehada. Have to see if I can change that name. I don't like it. Anyway, she really took it out of me so I could use a lie down. Overwhelmed by miracles, Jiraiya simply nodded dumbly and stood up. His voice deadened as he asked another question that had become obvious to him. Naruto, how can you even pick that sword up? It should stab anyone but Kisame who tries to use it. He grinned ruefully, holding up his left hand and displaying the palm. Even with his healing factor, Jiraiya could see recent lacerations in his skin that hadn't fully regenerated yet. She did at first. Even when I sealed her in a scroll the first time she slashed me a few times, he griped before patting the pommel of the legendary blade. I was out here trying to figure out why when I channeled some of my ether chakra. Jiraiya nodded to show he understood. Despite being what he was, Kyuubi was still a sore subject for Naruto to discuss, just to see what would happen. That was probably what woke you up. Samehada transformed into that sword you saw and it caught me a bit off guard. But since then she just took a couple of bites out of my chakra and we've been good. Only you, Naruto. He already knew the boy could win over hearts and minds like no one else he knew. It was the reason he decided to take the Gaki along on this trip in the first place, but this was something else. Only you could pilfer a Miss Nin's sword and make it yours in the space of less than a night. Still numb but with ideas and questions pouring through his mind at a rapid rate of knots, mostly involving just how powerful Naruto was likely to become with that blade now backing up his already monstrous chakra reserves. One last thing about his student's recent speech made him pause and then shudder suddenly. Naruto, the shinobi looked over both his shoulder and Samehada's blade as Jiraiya fought to master his voice. How do you know that blade is a she? To his relief the brat looked perplexed before shrugging. Tenten-chan always said most swords have female names and I wasn't sure what this one was called, so she's got to be a she. Oh, I never thought of that. A devious grin flitted across his lips for a minute. I've got to show her this when I get back. She'll go green with envy. No, scratch green. She'll turn pews seeing me with a legendary sword. Filled with a cackling glee, Naruto headed for his bed, not noticing as Jiraiya behind him paused and turned thankful eyes to the heavens. It's just a convention, not a fact. Breathing out a sigh of relief, he gave the back of Samehada a last wary glance before following after his student. After what I've seen tonight, that'd be a date even I wouldn't want to go on. Time to party. This show is rocking. In the Hokage booth of the Chunin exam arena surrounded by the helpless, boisterous noise of the crowd around him, only Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves, found himself apart from the general feeling of the rest of his citizens as the spectacle of the first match of the Chunin exam finals had played out before them. Slowly dragging his hands down his face, the old nin steeled his nerves and turned to face his opposite number from Suna, trying to make light of the situation. Hokage Dano, It wasn't often that Sarutobi was beaten to the punch, but these were far from usual circumstances, as the veiled village leader pointed a slender finger at the victorious figure bounding back up the stairs to wait for his next fight after sportingly bowing to his opponent. Just remind me again, which of your genin was that? That was Uzumaki Naruto, Sarutobi intoned heavily, trying hard to quash the upwelling of pride in his breast as he saw his adopted grandson advance to the next round of the exams. Konoha's #1 surprising ninja and currently waging a one-genin war on Konoha's diplomatic friendship with Suna and my blood pressure. I can only apologize. He fell silent as the other man raised a hand gently. No apologies necessary, Sarutobi Dano. He acted completely within the rules of the exam. In fact, I doubt we'll see a finer example of the ninja basics today. The boy confused, misdirected and drove his opponent up the wall before administering the coup de grace, a textbook example of a shinobi battle, and he used only one jutsu in the whole fight. True, though I have no idea where he learned a concealment jutsu that advanced. In fact, I know perfectly where he got it from. Grateful for his experience in thinking one thing while saying another, Sarutobi smiled at his guest at the same time as plotted a furious revenge against one of his students. Jiraiya, if you taught him that jutsu for the reasons I think you did, Minato will soon be having company in the Shinigami's belly. Still, it will be interesting to see if he can repeat the trick again. At that, the Kazekage laughed. Very true, even if another of my shinobi will be the target, though I must confess I doubt he would be able to hold his own against Gaara. The man broke off of a minute to pick his red-headed son out from the other competitors, a fond smile on his lips as he did so. He's grown so much, and finally has Suna's thanks and respect rather than its fear. Despite the veil covering his face, Sarutobi could almost see the sadness clouding his opposite number's face like oil poured on still water. The hardest decision I ever had to make came when he was born, and even now I still don't know if it was the right choice. I damned him to a childhood no father should have to see, let alone ask his son to bear. Sarutobi said nothing, merely placing a steadying hand on the younger man's shoulder, as he too remembered the pain someone who loved for a Jinchuriki could feel. More than once the visions in his crystal ball had driven him to tears and sake. The world of ninja was one of deception, and in this field Sarutobi stood almost alone in his experience. Only the Sandame of IWA could possibly hold a candle to his years of experience. Even in such a cutthroat world though, the aged Kage could think of no finer deception than the one pulled by the man to his side. Knowing that Suna was much weakened at the end of the Third Great Shinobi War, the current Kazekage had made a carefully calculated gamble in sealing the Ichibi, the one-tailed Tanuki Shikaku of the desert, into his youngest son. The sealing had cost the life of the priest who had performed the sealing, though both mother and son had survived and the power of the Bija had been harnessed in the creation of the new Jinchuriki. That alone would have brought Sarutobi's grudging respect. Though distasteful to use a child in such a manner, he wasn't so blind as to see the necessity of the Kazekage's actions in such desperate times for his village. However, what the man had done next had been equally cruel and brilliant in equal measure. Though the seal had held perfectly and Gaara was mostly dominant over his prisoner, even going so far as to impress the Bijou in his early life and for a semi-symbiotic relationship with it that led to his automatic sand defenses and mastery of the desert terrain, the Kazekage had spread rumors that the sealing had gone wrong, killing the boy's mother and turning his baby son into a monster. Sarutobi didn't presume to know the whole truth but knew that the Kazekage had remarried his wife in a private ceremony, and kept his youngest son away from Suna as a whole, though his older siblings were still his family and messed with him like a normal little brother. Once Gaara was old enough to understand the situation, the Kazekage had apparently sat his family down and asked them to perform a great sacrifice for Suna as a whole. Though the situation was much improved for the desert village, Suna was still the weakest of the 5 great nations, and its leader knew that IWA still harbored grudges against the Sand for standing with the Leaf when the Yellow Flash had been alive. For that reason, until the next generation of Suna shinobi were battle-hardened and ready to fight in a war if need be, Gaara needed to act the part of a demon to ensure his village's safety. Though the Kazekage was wounded that he needed to ask a young boy to take this burden and tears were shed on all sides, the youngest Sabaka proved equal to the task and the desert demon's prowess waxed strong. In fact, the heavy makeup he wore under his eyes to feign insomnia with the reasoning that Shikaku would devour his soul if he slept had been Gaara's idea and helped reinforce his persona as a killer. His brother and sister, strong shinobi in their own right, had made up his team and allowed him to drop the mask around his family and sensei, as Baki was as close to the Kazekage as his own right hand and the only non-family member to know how safely the Shikaku was bound, giving the boy some much-needed respite from the burden of wearing a murderer's mask every day. On missions Gaara was, or had been, a blood-crazed sociopath with his talk of mother and voices in his head, killing any opponent regardless of whether they surrendered or not unless his family could talk him out of his rage. Every time Sarutobi had met him, both on missions and in private, he had proven to be a little shy, and possibly a little cautious around people he didn't know, as his sand would automatically rear up at strangers until it got to know them. But apart from that, he was as well balanced a Jinchuriki as any Sarutobi had ever met or fought save maybe Naruto. The Kazekage's deception had been so complete, so astute, that even Oro Kimura had been fooled and fallen headfirst into a trap that had, Sarutobi hoped, drained most of the poison from that dangerous snake's fangs. The Hokage had first gotten wind of his treacherous student's intents from Jiraiya, the spy master informing him that he'd spotted Oto agents gaining audience with the Kazekage, one of them bearing the cursed seal of the Hibi-Sannin. Seeing the potential danger, Sarutobi had sent Son Goku himself, King Enma's son and the second most powerful of the ape summons, to petition the Kazekage of his students' intentions. The news he received back was disturbing. Apparently Konoha's recent revenue increase had come at the cost of their allies. The Wind Daimyo, apparently distrustful of his own shinobi, had been siphoning off more mission to Konoha, leaving Suna's military to starve. Like the vulture he was, Orochimaru had seen this and sought to turn Suna against the leaf for his own ends. In this though, he was foiled by the foresight of two of the most experienced Kages in the elemental nations as Hokage and Kazekage worked together to thrash out a deal that would both remove Orochimaru and force the Wind Daimyo to see the quality of his own forces. After correspondence and minor concessions from both sides, the basic plan had been formed. Konoha had kept taking the missions from Suna but kept the payments aside while the Kazekage became more frustrated with his lost business, listening to the honey Orochimaru poured into his ear. Eventually, after months of waiting, the trap had been sprung as the Kazekage agreed to meet the Snake Sage with a few bodyguards in attendance, and planned the first stages of an alliance. However, when Orochimaru arrived, he found his schemes unraveled, his backup plans quickly crushed, mostly literally, by the Jinchuriki of the desert and himself facing two Kages and his one-time teammate. The battle that followed was spectacular, and it spoke highly of Orochimaru's skills that he was able to escape alive, though not entirely unscathed. While Sarutobi was sure he would be able to heal up his wounds at the hands of Enna's diamond staff form, the blow Jiraiya had caught him with had, in the Toad Sage's own words, busted a few of the snake's fangs. The seal had been derived from an idea Minato had drafted but, thanks to Kyuubi, never had time to finish. After its first field trial, however, Jiraiya was heard to grimly nod that it had worked as well as famous students' other great seal. It had immediately been entered into the Forbidden Scroll of Konoha as an S-ranked kenjutsu, as anything that could break a shinobi from any summoning contract they held was a powerful tool indeed. Once the Toad Sage had brushed his former comrade's arm and intoned the seal, Orochimaru had simultaneously lost his summons. All the techniques that relied on the snake contract, including the hidden shadow snake hand, and the Kusanagi sword, held in the belly of a snake, he could no longer call upon. At this point the Hibi had turned tail and fled, screaming his intentions for revenge and leaving his former minions to their fate. It was a fate Sarutobi had left with the Kazekage, and it hadn't been unmerciful. Aside from the last Kagaya that he'd had to personally put down with Enma, as the boy had been fanatically devoted to Orochimaru, and would die rather than surrender. The rest of the Sound Five had been captured and Jiraiya had new samples of the curse seal to study. After getting the prisoners back to Suna, an amusing relief from the battle in and of itself as the girl of the group continued to swear and curse until Gaara gagged her with some of his sand, stating he was getting a headache. The Toad Sage had worked night and day until, at last, the seal was understood and could be nullified properly. Last the Hokage had heard, the former Sound Four were starting to come to terms with what had happened as the curse seal apparently warped the perceptions of the people it was implanted on, and were adapting to life in Suna, though the girl Taiya was repeatedly making a nuisance of herself by going out of her way to try and get Gaara back for the indignity of being dragged those Suna's gates with a ball of hardened sand between her teeth. Young love, Sarutobi thought to himself, masking a smile as he recalled his own courtship in younger days. How quickly does it go from fighting in battle to fighting in bed? Well, if that does happen, Gaara deserves it. He's owed some happiness in his life now. Aside from that, Suna was reimbursed for the missions Konoha took in their stead. Orochimaru is now in hiding due to the loss of Oto's anonymity, and Suna now has the respect of the man who finances it. Though it perhaps is a blessing from Kami that the Wind Daimyo is absent today. Seeing the boy Naruto had beaten finally trudge up the stairs to where his sister and younger brother were lending him a less than sympathetic ear to his moaning, Sarutobi permitted himself a slight smile at the irony of the boy everyone claimed was the dead last beating a supposedly superior shinobi with little more than deception and a mean pranking streak, as that performance may have given him more doubts about his shinobi forces. Kankuro was feeling pumped up and ready for this, though he wouldn't be able to use his disguise trick with Karasu again since his opponent had seen it in the preliminaries. He'd seen the boy he was fighting, one Naruto if he remembered rightly, fight in the preliminaries and didn't think much of his performance, though he had to respect his opponent's chakra capacity if the number of Kage-bushins he could pop out was any indication. Still, if the other genin was hit by a single one of his poisoned weapons, this match was as good as his. The paralysis agent would freeze a man up in seconds, giving him an easy win. He kept his confident face on as the other genin skipped down the stairs, the eye-searing orange of his uniform almost reminding the puppeteer of the desert sand of his home as Naruto crossed the arena and beamed at the referee. Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage, is here and ready to go. The Jounin simply coughed wetly again and turned to look at both Nin before looking up to the Hokage's booth, waiting for the signal to start the match. While this happened, Kankuro noticed that the smile had dropped from his opponent's face and, seizing the advantage, laughed loudly, pointing at the diminutive Nin. "What's the matter, kid?" He spoke tauntingly. "Scared of me? You should give up now and come back when you're out of nappies." The other boy seemed to flinch at the blow and Kankuro gave himself a pat on the back as a ripple of approval raced around the crowd at his psychological attack. With any luck, he'd be back in the stands and cheering on his siblings without even having to unwrap Karasu. Of course I'm scared of you. You're the only guy I've met more perverted than either of my 2 teachers, and believe me, that's some accomplishment. That one hadn't been in the script. Before the puppeteer could reply, Naruto had carried on, holding up his fingers as he went along with a new list. You tie yourself up like a mummy in public, walk around in a gimp suit in broad daylight, wear more makeup than your smoking hot sister, and you play with dolls. Man, those are some habits even Kakashi-sensei and Ero-senin wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. And even worse, you've corrupted your little brother into wearing eyeshadow. What kind of freak are you? Up in the stands, Gaara ran a finger under his eyes self-consciously. It wasn't his fault. Or Kankuro's either, for that matter. It was an essential service for his village. In the arena, Kankuro felt his face grow hot as he heard a couple of sniggers from the gantry, and with a flush he threw Karasu off his back, the bound puppet making a hollow wooden thump as it impacted in the tightly packed sand. That is not true. It's, what, you don't think your sister's smoking hot? Yes, no, she's my sister. Kankuro realized what the other boy was driving at and fought to keep himself from ripping the blonde brat limb from limb. It was a struggle that only got harder at Naruto's next words. After saying you wanted to see me in nappies, nothing about you would surprise me now. He's dead. He is going to beg me to kill him before I leave this arena. Kankuro said nothing, the breath all but boiling the air in front of him as he formed his battle strings, and Karasu unfolded itself from the wrappings as its master spoke in low, measured tones. Referee-san, start the match please so I can make this brat eat his words. To his infuriation, said brat merely smirked and shrugged as he nodded at hate. Just as long as you make sure that's all he tried to make me eat. Seeing and sensing confusion around him, Naruto made to deliver another cutting line. Just keep them off balance and go from there. Believe me, it's only going to get worse from here, buddy. Let's face it, that puppet doesn't look much like a girl. He left the rest unspoken, but the crowd understood as muffled, and in some cases not so muffled. Laughter began to rain down on them both. Deciding that the puppeteer would be out for Naruto's hide and that it would probably be best if the bloodbath started during the exams rather than before it, Hei brought his hand down at the same time he jumped backwards. Hajime! Shazam! Naruto threw something at the floor and a blinding light forced everyone to look away and cover their eyes. By the time the light faded, Kankuro and Karasu were alone in the center of the Colosseum. Naruto had vanished. He didn't attack when I was blinded, idiot. As he blinked back his vision and set Karasu to guard him while he thought up a plan, the Tsunade smirked. He's too soft under that bluster, he won't kill. Now, let's track him down. Moving his puppet around, the eldest son of the Kazekage gathered his chakra before releasing it in a pulse. Kai! Nothing happened. Damn, strong genjutsu. Kankuro cursed as his enemy was still invisible. It looked like he'd be forced to reveal some of his puppet's area effect weapons after all. He didn't want to waste any more chakra. Okay then, he had a plan. Now to make it happen while his opponent was still idle. Right, Karasu? Can't see him. Of course I can't. The puppet snapped moodily. You're the one with eyes and Kami help us, brains. Another spanner was thrown into Kankuro's mental gears as he registered who had spoken. With disbelieving eyes he looked up at the puppet in front of him, not fully processing what had happened. You, his voice trembled, you talked? Thank you, Captain Obvious. It quipped back snippingly in a manner that Kankuro, with a distinctly sinking feeling, thought he recognized. Anything else you'd like me to do? In fact, the puppet seemed to consider, an impressive feat as Kankuro wasn't making it move at the time. Don't answer that. I'm not voyeuristic. Trying to ignore the disembodied voice and the giggles it was generating from playing to the audience, the puppeteer stuck to his task of trying to root out the annoyance teasing him like this. Ah, shut up. He jerked his fingers and the wooden construct flitted about, a rain of samban peppering the area behind him with no apparent success. I'm going to kill you and then laugh about it. There was another laugh, this time from Karasu. No, you mean I'm going to kill him, lazy puppeteer. The puppet groused even as the air around it became saturated in an evil-looking purple mist. Always the same. I do the work, he gets the credit. Kill the genin, Karasu. Carry my lazy ass around, Karasu. Bend over and think of Suna, Karasu. There was sudden jerk on the puppet's strings that brought it to a complete halt as Kankuro, face red as he realized everyone was now laughing at him through his puppet's insinuations, lost sight of the antagonist he couldn't see in favor of the antagonist he could. That not true. Denying your issues doesn't make them go away, the puppet countered snidely, the mastermind behind this audacious scheme taking a second to make sure he wasn't about to give the game away by laughing at the jokes he was putting into the puppet's mouth. And don't try to say it's for maintenance either. Your body fluids do not count as a suitable lubricant for my interior joints. It might have been a long-term mission to suspend the threat of war over Suna, but never before had it been in more jeopardy. Watching his brother getting beaten down in a one-sided argument with his own puppet was driving Gaara to the brink of laughing out loud. This wasn't something a demon should be doing, though his father had recently said that he should start to let go of that persona now as, following the implosion of the mist into bloody civil war, Suna was no longer the weakest of the hidden villages. But he still wasn't entirely convinced this would be the best way to tell the world he was free of his supposedly mad mother. However, as the dialogue continued, he was forced to bite down on his tongue and watch Temari keel out of her seat, face bright red and tears streaming down her face. He realized he might not have a choice in the matter in a couple of minutes. Kankuro, for his part, was flabbergasted, and not just because it was getting harder by the second not to blow his own puppet sky high with a few explosive tags. Subconsciously he knew he was being led a merry dance, and was deep into the other ninja's trap, but the second he tried to break free, the damn nuisance would trigger another snare that would land him right back at square one. Where are you, you son of a bitch? The Tsunade howled aloud at the end of his tether, not noticing the killing intent being leveled at him for a small, feral-looking section of the crowd. I'm going to rip you apart, and show you the true meaning of pain. As he breathed heavily and scanned the arena again, still not sure how his opponent was keeping himself so well hidden, he heard a sickeningly familiar snigger. Oh, like that's going to scare him. A threat like that from the guy who defines morning wood as wake up and check for splinters. Why can't you use a blow-up like everyone else? Are you allergic to latex or something? Shut up. Make me. It was the closest Kankuro had ever come to hurling Karasu away from him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was a fight, not a comedy routine. And I didn't hear you telling me to shut up when you were inspecting my kunai holster with your special kunai. All but breathing fire by this point, Kankuro yanked his weapon around brutally and fired off a rain of kunai randomly around the fighting area, hitting nothing but sand as the howls of the audience crashed in his ears. None of this is true. You got that right. He was so surprised with his pseudo-opponent agreeing with him that he stopped mid-sentence. A fatal mistake. You couldn't get your rocks off there. You had to use the Sanban launcher. At that final insult, Kankuro snapped like a dry twig. Screaming in rage, the puppeteer hurled the disobedient puppet around, firing off weapons like they were going out of fashion in the vain hope of flushing out his hidden quarry. Come out and fight me, you coward. You're nothing if all you can do is taunt. Someone cleared their throat nearby, but Kankuro was too far gone in his rage to realize it. You're not a shinobi, you're a joke, a freak and a dead last. The throat was cleared again, this time louder, but still the Tsunade ignored it. You're not fit to be a chunin. You don't have the guts or the skills to lead a squad and kill. He paused for a second, breath heaving in his lungs and not recognizing the audience, suddenly falling silent, focusing all his attention on Karasu as it spoke again. You tell him, boss, but there's one thing you forgot to mention, that he is. What? A sudden impact pitched the puppeteer forwards on his face, Karasu going limp as his concentration broke and the chakra strings animating it faltered and flickered from existence. Dry sand and dust filled the Tsunade's nose as something grabbed his hood and yanked his head up. He struggled and tried to kick the assailant off his back, but froze as he felt a shock of cold steel under his throat, listening to a voice in his ear that was suddenly bereft of the teasing lilt Karasu had used. He's behind you, Naruto informed him before looking up at Hate. Jounin-san, from here I could kill him at any time. I claim victory. Hate inspected the scene for a minute before nodding, coughing and raising his hand. Shosha, Uzumaki Naruto. The audience, which had been stunned into silence as the orange boy had shimmered back into visibility and stalked the back of his enraged opponent, broke out into spontaneous applause that Naruto lapped up eagerly. It was an amazing feeling to hear so many people cheering for him. He raised his head and gave a wild grin, only to hear a sudden whisper from below. Hey Naruto. Hearing his prisoner talking, the Jinchuriki leant over to listen as the painted boy hung his head. Just do it, will you? You beat me and I never got close. I can't look at the other Suna shinobi now, so just give me. I'll give you a clout around the ears if you finish that sentence, the genin growled, taking the kunai away from Kankuro's throat in case the other ninja got any ideas. You lost the fight but not your life. Be grateful and learn from it. Oh, and just to make it up to you, twisting around as much as he was able to, the puppeteer saw an evil smirk on the blonde boy's face as he leant down and whispered something that only Kankuro could hear. It was a simple enough promise, but one that blew all the cobwebs and thoughts of seppuku right out of the older nin's head and dragged a matching evil smile to his lips. That smile was still in place as the puppeteer finished gathering all his spent weapons and reloaded them into his now mercifully silent puppet. As he stepped back up the stairs to the competitor's box, it dimmed a little as he saw Naruto being virtually mugged by the other Konohanins. The tattooed boy he'd fought in the preliminaries in particular laughing and bowing in thanks to the prankster that he hadn't fought that way a month ago. Kankuro shrugged and walked away to beside the rest of his team and family, nodding as he accepted some half-apologetic smiles from the contingent of neens that were starting to recover from their laughing fits. Slumping into his seat, he massaged his eyes with a free hand and grunted to the person sitting next to him without looking. Go ahead. I know what's going to happen next. And happen it did. Temari and, to his surprise, Gaara as well burst out laughing again, though the Achibi container was far more constrained in his mirth compared to his sister. The wind mistress was actively bumping her forehead from the tip of her fan as she rocked forwards and back like a leaf in a gale of laughter, thumping her brother on the shoulder. So Sora hee, she broke off to wipe her eyes, grin on her face a mile wide bu, but that was something else. I never, he's a ventriloquist. To use that on a puppetee here, oh that's going down in Suna history. She broke down again, taking advantage of the impromptu lull in the matches that had followed, Naruto half killing the audience with his one-liners and Karasu's unwitting assistance. Kankuro merely massaged his forehead and looked over at her, face set in a basilisk stare. You know Mari, there's only one thing that makes this whole thing just about bearable for me right now. Guess what that is? Shaking her head in a way that made her ponytails shake, Temari waited in anticipation for her younger brother's answer, though the grin his painted face split into when he spoke next punctured some of the mirthful mood that had surrounded her. He's up against you next round. Temari went pale. Let's find out. During the recess after all the first-round matches, Sarutobi stretched back in his chair and fanned himself gently with the Hokage's hat, wincing as something in his back let him know its displeasure with the sudden movement in the form of a sharp grinding pain and dull snap. Kami, I'm too old for this. I need to get Jiraiya on the case of tracking down my replacement as soon as these exams are over, after I finish raking him over the coals for teaching Naruto the ways of the super pervert. Still, on the bright side, it was a nice day to be outside and the exams had been a great success so far. Though Sarutobi was forced to mask a smile as a part of his conscience reminded him that there was at least one genin candidate who was probably wishing he hadn't got out of bed that morning. Masking his humor with a contemplative look, the Sandaime looked across to his opposite number from Suna. The younger man likewise sat back in his chair with his fingers steepled under his chin. A reel for your thoughts, Kazekage Deno? Startled, the leader of Suna's military strength jerked upright before relaxing again, nodding as he spoke carefully. Hi Hokage Dano, the matches have gone well so far. 2 of Suna's nins are through and at least one of them should reach chunin, if not higher. I agree, Gara-san's strength is far beyond that of any of the other candidates here. The old man agreed diplomatically. Though if he and Naruto decided to go all out, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near the danger zone. The way he handled the Hyuga prodigy was truly inspired. Niji never got close and he is, despite his attitude, a formidable nin. His chivalry, despite himself, Sarutobi couldn't help but smirk as the Kazekage shuddered silently, though the veil he wore concealed any potential blush. Also won him many friends, especially from Team 8. That much was certainly true. Everyone in the stands knew the match was over the second the Tsunade had managed to wrap the Hyuga up in his sand after disrupting the so-called perfect defense of the prodigy by forcing the sand under his spinning feet to shift unexpectedly. Most of the audience had expected Niji to meet a messy end at that point, but what had happened next had shocked everyone there. Even the Jinchuriki's own father, poor Hyuga Hinata, had nearly fainted dead away when Gaara had shouted for her loud enough for the entire stadium to hear. Lady Hinata-san, this fool's fate is in your hands. At once all eyes had swiveled to the girl Niji had brutalized in the preliminary rounds, and she let out an eep, almost missing the rest of the Tsunade's proclamation as she sought to hide behind Kiba. Do you want me to kill him or spare him for what he did to you? It took a moment of virtual hyperventilation and Akamaru licking her hand reassuringly for her to gather the tiny scraps of courage left in her body and reply in a whispering shout that, regardless of its quiet nature, everyone in the stadium heard. Ayano, Gara-san, please don't kill him. Trembling slightly, she looked down at the restrained form of her cousin, lavender eyes radiating concern and possibly pity despite the wounds he had inflicted upon her not a month earlier. He has been hurt by the past, more than anyone could know. The red-headed Suna Jinchuriki nodded before looking forwards again, skillfully manipulating the sand around Niji's body to force the older Hyuga to lock eyes with him as he spoke again. Your life was spared by your weakling of a cousin. Because of her kind words and only her kind words you still have a fate in this world, he raising his hand forwards, eyes suddenly becoming teal jade stones and tone expressionless as he commanded his battle sand once more. Remember that when you wake up. That girl was always very kind, never did have the heart to kill from what I hear. Sarutobi reminisced as he absent-mindedly pulled his pipe from a pocket of his robe and lit it. I must remember to see if the medical corps would be interested in teaching a Hyuga, or at least, teaching Hinata. I agree. The sudden noise almost made the Sandaime jump. He hadn't realized he was speaking out loud. The main branch heir. She is different from most Hyuga I have met. From what I know of the clan, most main branch members would have had Gaara crush his opponent like a grape in that situation, assuming they didn't use that controlling seal on their opponent first. It was a fair point. The Hokage was forced to concede that at any time during the inter-clan bout Hinata could have forced her cousin to submit via use of the caged bird seal, though the fact that she had not spoke much of her courage in the aged nin's eyes. I agree, and it was both kind of her to ask Gaara to spare him and noble of Gaara to ask, though did he have to break Niji's arms before the bout ended? The Kazekage looked over as Sarutobi shrugged. I only ask because the council will probably moan if I don't. They must protect their geniuses after all. Considering this for a moment, the other man shrugged. Gaara hates bullies, and they were clean breaks. He should be back in duty in less than a month, he stated dismissively, privately agreeing with the actions of his youngest son as the arrogant Hyuga's actions in the preliminary round, against his own flesh and blood no less, had sickened him. Though my son was very impressed by that Hyuga's teammate, no one I know of has ever broken out of the sand coffin before, or landed a hit on him without the use of chakra in a duel. The Hokage chuckled. Yes, Rock Lee is well on his way to becoming the Leaf's latest taijutsu master in time, and that he can open so many of the celestial gates so young bodes well for him. I think he will prove his nindo. He can become a great ninja without chakra, and his loyalty to his team and his sensei's word is commendable, the Kazekage agreed, remembering being forced to shield his eyes during the preliminaries as Gaara's technique had suddenly exploded everywhere, forced away from the body of its victim as Lee opened his first gate before forfeiting immediately afterwards in respect to his teacher's wishes. I promised Gai-sensei not to open the gates except to protect a precious person. It would be unyouthful of me to use them just to attempt promotion. That will, and 5 of the gates in reserve. He will make chunin, I assume? Oh, most definitely. Sarutobi confirmed with a nod of his head, though Lee hadn't progressed to the finals. What the genin weren't told was that every stage of the competition was graded. Technically a genin could be failed at the first stage due to the actions of his teammates, but still get promoted if a specific branch of the village's ninja took interest and accepted his performance, though I imagine the council's going to pitch a fit when they realize the Uchiha didn't make the grade. True, but the Aburame was perhaps his worst matchup, the Kazekage said fairly. I was quite surprised his coup of techniques was as small as it was. Has his Sharingan only recently awoken? I'm not entirely sure when he was able to access it, but I know his sensei has enough experience with that eye to train it well enough. Sarutobi waited until the Kazekage was able to put the pieces together, speaking only when the other man visibly jolted with surprise. Kakashi is not just the owner of all his jutsus, he is the master of most of them. Unless he copies a technique he cannot use for some reason, he will train himself relentlessly until the new jutsu is second nature to him. He must have set Sasuke the same example, either that or he tried spying on someone else's training session and got caught. He shrugged as his guest raised an eyebrow. It happened a few times before the Uchiha tragedy. It was not tolerated then and will certainly not be tolerated now. The Kazekage appeared to consider this for a moment before letting his opinion be known. A sensible precaution, both for the Uchiha and the village. No shinobi likes his hard work being stolen after all. Still, in Sasuke's case I doubt the latter would come to pass. He apologized to his teacher for accidentally stealing his jutsu after all. Jounin-san, as with all Aburame, Shino's voice was cool and logical as he held out a hand to control the swarm buzzing around his opponent. From here I could drain the chakra from my opponent, and I claim victory. Hate looked over at the beleaguered Uchiha, and, seeing the raven nod shallowly, raised his hand and called the match. Shouja, Aburame Shino. As expected the crowd was rather quiet at this supposed upset, though the ninja in the crowd reviewing the battle were nodding with the verdict. Shino's strategy had been all but perfect as he had isolated the one weakness of Katan jutsus. The user had to breathe in prior to using them. By having a single insect flying around Sasuke's head and threatening to fly into his mouth every time he looked to take a big breath of air, the silent Nin had shut down a large amount of Sasuke's offense and, after skillfully forcing the Uchiha to move and using some of his swarm to burrow underground in a delayed trap, had managed to drown his opponent in the midst of his swarm. Calling in his symbiotes once more, the Aburame bowed towards the Hokage's box while Hate turned towards where Sasuke stood scowling in defeat but still resigned to it, and asked the traditional question for defeated Nin. Coup! At this Sasuke brightened somewhat. He always did enjoy a chance to show off regardless of the circumstances. Coup was a chance for a Nin beaten during a selection exam to give examples of any jutsus they knew that they weren't able to use in the tournament, making up for Nin who were forced to withdraw or beaten by opponents who had an inherent advantage over them. In this case Sasuke knew it was his big shot for promotion and attacked it with a will, hurling fire and flame around the arena at a terrifying rate. The demonstration had lasted over 2 minutes before the Uchiha came to a halt in the center of the ring, breathing slightly heavily but still upright. When he didn't move for a few seconds Hate spoke once more after coughing again. Finished, Sasuke-san? The boy didn't respond for a moment. In fact to Hate he looked to be deep in thought, though before the Jounin could call time on his performance he turned and called into the crowd. I have one more jutsu, though Kakashi-sensei. The copy Nin looked over his book as his student shouted up to him. I copied this one from you inadvertently but have been studying in my own time to make it work as it suits my affinities. I hope you find me worthy of it. With that, the genin bowed to his teacher and flexed one arm, concentrating hard. For a moment nothing happened before. With a recognizable crack and distinctive noise, a small ball of lightning flickered to life in his palm, Sasuke roaring the name of his technique as he thrust his arm forwards and allowed the lightning chakra to disperse. Chidori. Silence met his announcement for a second before thunderous applause rained down from the civilians present. Once more the last Uchiha had surpassed the norm for his age by knowing such a high-level technique. Sasuke fell to one knee, heaving for breath like he just run a marathon, though he recovered enough to wave off Haid's offer of assistance, and climb back to his feet and bow to the village leaders unaided. Knowing he'd done all he could and the rest was out of his hands, Sasuke walked slowly towards the stands and levered himself up the stairs, nodding politely at the well-wishers offering him luck and appreciation on the way. On reaching the seating area the Uchiha Raven collapsed into the nearest seat, flexing his hand experimentally and grimacing, though it didn't burn anymore. Trying to use that jutsu still made his hand cramp like there was no tomorrow. That was awesome, Sasuke-kun. There were at least 2 more fireballs per shot than the last time I saw you. As expected, Sakura spoke to him first, though her tone was no longer the blind squealing of someone hopelessly infatuated with another person, since they had become Team 7. All 3 genin on the squad had matured, Sakura perhaps more than the others as she was now offering a critique of his skills. Next time though, try breathing through your nose, it's harder to see. I'll keep it in mind, he commented offhandedly before turning to see a grinning Naruto and his sensei smiling with his one visible eye. Sorry I miss your match, Naruto, but it's easier than you think to get lost on the road of life. The blonde grinned before clapping his teammate on the shoulder. If Kakashi-sensei wasn't late for anything but his own funeral the ANBU would be checking for an imposter. Anyway, I'm sure the others will fill you in, he mentioned with a gleam in his eye that made even Sasuke nervous. Looking like that, he either won by a fluke or by a mile, and right now I'm banking on a mile. Still, what was the last jutsu you used again? At this point, Kakashi interjected. Chidori, my one personal jutsu and a high B-ranked assassination technique. He rolled a stern but not unkind eye towards the genius of his team. Not something that should be taught to a genin, but I'm proud you didn't go overboard with the training on it. Sasuke shook his head. Never again. One lesson I didn't need the Sharingan to learn, the Raven confirmed. The memory of being held by both Sakura and Naruto for nearly half a day at their training ground after the mental blocks he had built up over the years had shattered under the combined weight of the memories of the murder of his entire family, years of relentless training without so much as a single day's break, and the visual knowledge of Naruto, the dobe in class dead last, learning a skill faster than he, the clan genius and rookie of the year, could pick up, haunting him even to this day. In that moment he'd completely snapped over the simplest little thing, seeing Naruto pitch a tent faster than he could. The memories immediately afterwards were a bit of a blur, but as far as he could recall he'd gone from trying dementedly to kill the blonde with a kunai and his own bare hands, to sobbing into his shoulder as the pressure of his own expectations finally ground him into the dirt, and drove tears from his onyx eyes. The smell of his friend's blood heavy in his nose as the orange jumpsuit and the shoulder of Sakura's dress soaked up his crying. I changed that day, we all did. It was a truth that Sasuke couldn't doubt, as since that time he felt almost lighter, as though vengeance against Itachi was more a long-term goal, rather than something to be pursued regardless of the cost to both himself and others. While still proud of his achievements, he was also able to enjoy the skill of his team and the achievements of others. The memory of tying the ribbon Sakura had worn in her bout against Ino into her hair, and her grateful smile as he arranged her hair around his artwork, was somehow more important than the urge to master a new jutsu, or show off his Sharingan to wow the civilians. Similarly, Naruto had been more than willing to share his trump-card jutsu, the Kagebushin, with both his teammates once they had Kakashi's approval and supervision once they asked him how it worked, rather than demand or try to coerce him into revealing his secrets. The jump-suited boy was still the master of his jutsu though, as Sasuke could only manage a single Kagebushin at best and Sakura couldn't even do that until her reserves increased or she had help from soldier pills. But such a team ethos and camaraderie was helping him, and the others, far more than isolated training ever had. As he heard Naruto's name being called once more, Sasuke slapped his teammate on the shoulder and smirked. It's up to you now, Naruto, go knock them dead. The grin he knew so well flashed into place, and at that point Sasuke knew, instinctively knew, he and the rest of the audience were in for a real bout this time. Just watch me knock their socks off. Believe it. I do believe it, just like I believe you'll be Hokage someday. Just as long as you can help me out with bringing Itachi to book before you do it. Seeing his smaller teammate vault down the stairs, Sasuke stretched out before looking over his shoulder to his other teammate, wondering why she looked so stricken at his parting words. So, what did we miss? The Nara will have to make chunin, given his results on all 3 stages of the exam, the Hokage stated before chuckling, that I'm sure will upset him. He'll have even less of an excuse to slack off without his team to pick up the slack. I agree. I never thought I'd meet the nin who could give Shikaka-san a run for his money in the laziness stakes, but his son has the potential. The Kazekage agreed, having met the soon-to-be Chunin's father on a couple of occasions both on and off the battlefield. Hopefully his mother will be able to motivate him enough to move into his own apartment at least, Sarutobi muttered under his breath before clearing his throat. Still, your daughter Kazekage-dano? She appears to have leadership potential when her youngest brother is absent, and her wind affinity must be approaching mastery. You flatter both me and her Hokage-dano, the other man chortled, waving off the older man's comments as though they were a cloud of flies, though perhaps that is not Temari-chan's fault. Her first match gave her all the advantages. I will leave it to her next match to see if she has earned her vest yet. Oh yes. Realizing that it had all boiled down to this, and knowing he'd run out of wriggle room, Sarutobi braced himself to seize the bull by the horns. Or, more appropriately, the fox by the tail. True, but the last match, Uzumaki Naruto, Konoha's most surprising ninja, and with good reason, the Kazekage intoned, folding his arms as he did so, seemingly deep in thought. Even had Kankuro won, I would not have pushed for his promotion. Between Gaara and Temari he's had no experience in a leadership role. But Naruto's strategy, he fell silent for a moment before looking across. The saying in Suna is that genius and idiocy differ only in success. Even now I confess I'm not sure what camp to put him in. You and everyone else in the Hidden Leaf, Sarutobi informed him, inwardly cringing as he realized the time was almost upon them to see what mischief his adopted grandson was going to cook up next. Please Kami, if you can hear an old man's prayer, please let the Kazekage keep his good mood until the end of these exams. I really don't need a diplomatic incident on my desk before the day is out. Having mentally said his prayer, the Hokage paused for a second to ensure all his guests were seated comfortably before nodding and raising a hand to hate. The proctor bowed at the signal and called up to the contestants' booth. Sabaka no Temari and Uzumaki Naruto to the floor please. Despite her outward composure, Temari felt a cold chill run right through her at the summons, and Kankuro's expectantly evil grin wasn't helping matters any as she whipped open her fan and glided gracefully down to the arena. If there was one consolation to getting caught by that lazy bum, she clenched her teeth at the memory of the cold, alien sensation that had flooded her body as Shikamaru's shadow had merged with her own, trapping her completely and putting her at his mercy, No one in Suna had been able to outthink her to that extent before, and she realized, belatedly, how sharp the mind hidden behind that uncaring exterior actually was. It was that I assumed he was going to have try and put this gaki down rather than me. In fact, I'll bet this was one of the reasons he forfeited in the first place. It all made sense now, and Temari felt her heart sink. If Shikamaru had known, or at least guessed, at what Naruto was capable of and decided it was too troublesome to even try and fight him, where would that leave her against the orange-clad Nin who was now standing across from her, smiling brightly as he looked around and shot her a thumbs up. Give him nothing. Despite his cheesy attitude, Temari remained stone-faced, half listening as the proctor explained the rules again. Temari-chan. The name almost made her slip up, but she wrestled the blush down. No one in Suna had ever called her Chan. Too afraid of her father and little brother for such familiarity, but it seemed Naruto either knew no fear or had no sense. Something on your mind? She blinked for a minute before smirking and hefting her battle fan over her shoulder. Yes, thinking of all the ways I'm going to stomp you into the ground before this match is over. Oh, right. The boy appeared to be disappointed before suddenly shrugging it off and smiling again. Well, just as long as you're stomping my face I won't mind. He left in a second, just long enough for his opponent to look confused, before going for the jugular. At least that way I'd get a glimpse of heaven before ending up in hell. Temari didn't have a chance of holding it at that one, and a blush spread over her cheeks as she choked in equal parts anger and outrage. Quick as the proverbial creature sealed in his belly, the Konoha Jinchuriki was onto it, and not letting go. What's the matter, Temari-chan? You weren't thinking about some boy back at home, were you? Just somehow instinctively knowing he'd take and spin her silence as a yes. Temari was forced to run as much damage control as she could get her hands on and pray just wait for the chance to snap the little gaki in half when the match started. Ha! As if, she tossed one of her ponytail back over her shoulder, giving the best haughty glare as she could. Never yet met the man that could come close to keeping up with me. Good, that shut him up. Breathing a silent sigh of relief, the kunoichi prepared herself for a war only to be brought crashing back down to earth by his infuriating voice once more. But why was he bowing in apology? Oh, I see. I understand, and I'm sorry if my earlier comments offended you. He straightened up before suddenly looking towards the gantry and calling up in a cheerful voice. Tenten-chan, looks like you have an admirer down here. There was a sudden outburst of snickering at this point, as well as a sudden surprised gasp from one particular bun-haired kunoichi in the crowd, before the Suna Nin wrestled back the initiative. I'm not interested in women, you little gaki. She drew herself upright again, ready to deliver a line of her own, only for Naruto to sneak in and get the drop on her. But the way you swept her out the air, just as she fainted. He clasped his hands dramatically in front of him, face a beatific expression of appreciative grace as herself the preliminary match. Seeing once more the Suna Nin sweep Konoha's unconscious weapons mistress from the air with the body of her war fan, so noble, so romantic. What, you think I should have impaled her on her own weapon stash? Temari's colder voice pierced his ideas cruelly. Her face curled into a derisive expression of scorn. I didn't think you leaf Nins were that callous. To her surprise, Naruto seemed to stare at her, blinking, and she gloried in the sensation of wrong-footing the sharp-tongued shinobi. Now just start the match so I can bury him properly, and my life shall be. That train of thought hit the buffer as she saw his eyes light up and was overcome with a sudden feeling that she just handed him something on a plate. What you impale your girlfriends with is entirely your business, though I must say, he paused for just an instant, just long enough for most of the audience to get the joke and start pitching in with their laughter, before finishing the line. I think the Tetsubo might be asking certain things to stretch a little too far. That was it. Kankuro was helplessly gone as he watched his sister splutter at her opponent's latest insinuation. Somehow, being beaten by the leaf Nin didn't seem like such a massive problem now. He was observing someone else getting the same treatment. Wiping his eyes before they could run and ruin his war paint, the puppeteer looked over at the rest of his last opponent's team and promptly redoubled his laughter at their looks. The black-haired boy had a hand over his face and appeared to be muttering under his breath. Their sensei had the book in his hand a little closer to his face than was necessary to ensure easy reading while the girl was leaning over the back of her seat, looking for someone. Seeing the cherry blossom perk up and curious despite himself, Kankuro casually channeled a sliver of chakra to his ears to listen, and as Sakura bowed to the kunoichi the puppeteer recognized as being Tenten, the girl Temari had rolled over in the preliminaries. Tenten-san, I apologize on the behalf of my baka teammate, and I promise you. Apologize for what? Hearing the voice, the bun-headed girl looked up and revealed her red face and wet eyes to be due to tears of laughter rather than humiliation. I had this before off dad until I could prove Niji was actually a guy. Go Naruto. The last part was a shout directed to the floor. A sentiment echoed by the tattooed boy who had been the dead last's opponent in the preliminaries. She said it. Go get her, bud. Leaning back in his seat, Kiba reviewed the last minute or so and found himself chuckling again. Out of all the clans of Konoha, the Inuzuka had a bawdiest sense of humor, and he could almost hear the others of his clan who had attended laughing from where he was sat. Least of all his mother and sister. When I get home tonight I'm going to burn a ton of incense. Get down on my knees and thank every kami in existence he didn't try to pull this crap in the preliminaries. Right now a fart seems tame compared to this. You got that right. Chuji chipped in, offering a bag of crisps that Kiba immediately dove his hand into, fishing out a couple of crisps to share with Akamaru. I'm sure glad I didn't square off against him. It'd only take one F-word to drive me up the wall. Ayano. Both boys looked over to see Hinata poking her fingers together, posture hunched but voice stronger that Kiba could remember it being for a while. And Naruto-kun would not say things to hurt people. He makes fun of them but that's all. Both boys shared a look, gathering the attention of the others in their teams, before Aino spoke up, flipping her shortened hair over her shoulder. Fun or not, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind when he drags his sorry but back up here, the youngest Yamanaka declared, looking annoyed as she saw Hate raise his hand. You don't say things like that to Kunoichi and hope to get away with it. All girls together, right, Hinata? Kurenai-sensei? Talk and watch, Ino. It's going down now, Kiba informed her, the other genin quickly dropping into their seats as both fighters jumped backwards from each other. Though a second later a grin appeared on the Inuzuka's fang features though. While we're on the subject, who up for a bit of a bet? Temari sprang backwards, all senses straining to try and catch a hint of what her opponent was planning for his next move. When it looked like he too was contemplating the same problem, the Wind Mistress whipped her fan forwards quickly. The technique had no real power in it, just enough to ruffle the younger nin's bright blonde hair, but the intent was there along with the message she delivered with an arrogant sneer. You can't pull that stunt that worked on my brother, she told him, snapping her fan open to emphasize the point. Doesn't matter what stone you crawl under, I'll just blow it. And you away. Ah, Temari-chan. She was beginning to hate that name, she realized, casually deflecting a brace of thrown kunai with the steel edge of her weapon. You blew me away the first time I saw you. He's flirting with me, in the middle of a battle. I'll kick his ass so hard his grandfather won't sit down for a week. The age-old memories of less than savory treatment from other male nins, at least before she had pinned them to the nearest wall for their derogatory comments, made her vision flash red, and with a snarl she swung her fan around, a lot more venom in her blow this time. That's it, kid, I'm going straight to the third moon on you, Wind Cutter. The technique kicked up a storm of dust from the ground, but Temari had a suspicion Naruto was too slippery to get caught with an attack that obvious, and kept her senses alert. As she felt the chakra flare off to her left but slightly behind her, right where those kunai went, he switched with them, and spun, only to find herself facing not one but a baker's dozen of opponents, all making hand signs with grim faces as their ringleader shouts solidly. 3 moons, is that it? Take this, shit. With no time to dodge and nothing convenient within line of sight to switch with, Temari crouched and raised her fan, channeling chakra through it to make the weapon nigh unbreakable, though she lost the line of sight to her target. Uzumaki Naruto's secret technique. A dozen deadly moons. Temari involuntarily flinched, but no impact came. She waited a split second before, detecting no chakra being used and hearing the sudden silence, punctuated only by a couple of sudden barks of laughers from some people in the crowd. She peeked over the roof of her fan only to gawk as she found herself staring down the barrel of a 12-bump salute. Unfortunately, as Naruto and his clones had been facing the competitor's box just prior to 12 of them dropping their trousers, the rest of his year group had been caught in the crossfire. As a result of that oversight, Team 8 were left trying to rouse Hinata from her sudden dead faint, though they were forced to agree with Kiba's observation that the smile on the sleeping girl's face was almost too cute to ruin by shaking her awake. Most of the other guys in the audience were howling with laughter and catcalling the cheeky shinobi. The kunoichi present were silently plotting ways to make the Uzumaki's imminent beating, castration and possible murder look like an accident, and Team 7 were currently wishing for the earth to open and swallow them whole. Baki-sensei, hunched over clutching his juddering stomach as he was Gaara, had to force himself to stand upright and address his sensei over the sprawled form of his brother. Kankuro having to fight hard to breathe at the minute. Your girlfriend's dignity is under attack. Shouldn't you do something to protect her innocent eyes? Bah, the older nin chuckled back. The idea that the eldest Suna sibling had a crush on their instructor was the in-joke of their team. Birthed when a 6-year-old Temari had blushed bright red as the then handsome Jounin had complimented the kimono she was wearing, and was still running strong even now. She can take care of herself. Besides, as a feminine shriek of rage echoed up to the galley, Baki was forced to mask a smirk as Kankuro howled with laughter again, tears pouring from his eyes. Right now all she's got is plenty of indignity. But dignity, he shook his head, recognizing a kind of demented genius at work against his student. Not after that nin gets through with her. It was like the first time she'd seen the aftermath of Gaara's desert burial. It was horrible, but she couldn't tear her eye away from the unedifying spectacle in front of her. She was locked in place by the sight of so many rear ends facing her way, so much so that it was only when one of the clones looked under his arm, flashed a brilliant grin and spoke that the spell was broken. What's wrong, Temari-chan? Said clone gave a wiggle, making her feel sick. Like what you see? That was it. With a roar she whipped the fan around, and a split second later 12 of the Narutos burst into smoke, the last one of the unlucky number scrambling to safety and distracting her follow-up attack by dint of a couple of shuriken forcing her to jump aside, not taking her eyes off her opponent this time. Ah, that was mean, Tsunaheim. Some of the girls at the academy said I had a cute butt. Naruto had to hide his self-satisfied grin as he rolled out the way of another concentrated wind blast. The last bit was a barefaced lie, but she didn't need to know that. Everything was all going according to plan. You could have spared my pride at least. That'll be the only thing I spare. His opponent shot back, using her fan to vault backwards as he ran up the arena wall and kicked off. She thought she had him when her wind blast knocked his launched kunai from the air, but gnashed her teeth in frustration as he popped a shadow clone out in midair to throw him clear of the danger zone. Everything else you've got is going to die when I get my hands on it. Hey, all you need to do is ask and you can get your hands all over him. He is going to die. I cannot let this damn aggravating live. It's my civic duty to shinobi everywhere to put him down. Temari was forced to repress a shudder as Naruto put his hands behind his head before running them over his jumpsuit suggestively though. Fair must be fair overall. I gave you a free show of the goods, I reckon. Die. Realizing what he was after this time, Temari decided to end the farce. Her fan opened to its fullest extent, she whipped her body in a full circle, pouring chakra into the air and sending out a rain of wind daggers. There is nowhere for her opponent to run, she could see the fear in his eyes, he was about to have vanished. He switched with something. Looking around the entire arena, Temari gripped her fan close and tried to hide her breathing. The last move had cost a lot of chakra. But where did he go? It was only when she heard a characteristic poofing noise above her that she looked up and gasped, along with some of the audience that had seen her opponent's latest strategy. Naruto was in the air and falling, but he was falling under control. He had a Kage Bushin underneath him and was riding its shoulders to the ground. Every time the journey picked up a bit too much speed, he merely jumped off, let the Bushin dispel and conjured another one under his feet. Damn, I need more time. She knew while he was in the air he was in her element, but she didn't have enough chakra immediately to hand to use a technique. Instead she took a breather as the jumpsuited shinobi made one last ride and, with a theatrical flourish, 6 of him landed on the floor together, and gave a victory pose. Mizuki-sensei always said I was a shower of a shinobi, one of them stated, shrugging with a grin. Guess he was right in the end. The grin dropped from his face like a stone, however, as his opponent, rested from her last attack, stood tall again. And he was, Temari informed him, hoping to make him as angry as he had made her. How the hell did a midget prankster like you graduate? You've not laid a hand on me and I'll side you down before any of those clones get close. Dead last, she spat the title like a curse. Don't make me laugh. You're a disgrace to dead last the world over. Nailed him. At once all the clones dispelled, leaving only the original standing there with a murderous look on his face. Temari clenched her fan tightly shut, the odds now back in her favor as she'd taken away his ability to strategize. Dead last am I? He said coldly before cracking his fingers. Kakashi-sensei, thanks for the inspiration. You can put this down as the 1001st jutsu you copied. I'll lay a hand on you, Temari-chan, and more besides. He crouched as though ready to sprint, his opponent let her fan hang low, ready to whip it up at a second's notice and dash his headlong charge to ruin and hopefully a coma. Come on little boy, just run at defenseless. Weak little me like the headstrong little lemming you are and I'm in the final. Konoha Ultimate Taijutsu Technique number 2. With those words, he vanished. There were no hand signs, no smoke and no object appeared in his place. The disappearance was so sudden Temari almost swung regardless, thinking he'd upped his speed like that green spandex-wearing freak from the preliminaries had. Before she could even think about what had happened, a voice suddenly bellowed in her ear. Eternity of pleasure. The voice had made her jump involuntarily. Probably the worst thing she could have possibly done as 2 chakra-laden hands suddenly rushed towards their now exposed target, impacting with a loud slap before giving a very firm squeeze. Up in the stands, Kakashi was virtually bouncing with pride on the inside as the Suna Kunoichi was catapulted away from his students below the belt strike, though for his own safety he hid it, and his usual book, behind a facade of indifferent. With so many of the Kunoichi around him now out for blood after Naruto's latest move, this wasn't a safe place to be a pervert. I've created a monster, he muttered under his breath before suddenly breaking out a sweat as the killing intent of several genin, and one Jounin sensei sought to pin him to the wall. I'd just like to point out that technique was absolutely nothing to do with me, unfortunately. The last word slipped out involuntarily and Kakashi found the killing intent doubling, as he tried to talk himself out of getting staked out in the forest for the ants. Gaara found himself at a bit of a crossroads and leant over to ask his brother a question. Kankuro, the puppeteer, looked up and wiped his running war paint again. He knew it was ruined, but right now he didn't care as watching Temari, the big sister who used to beat him up for even looking at another girl with a twinkle in his eye, get her rear end slapped and grabbed was too deliciously ironic for him to do anything but laugh. Yeah? I'm confused. Seeing his brother raise an eyebrow, he elaborated. Half of me wants to shake Uzumaki's hand for doing that to Temari. The other half wants to rip his arms off for molesting our sister. What should I do? Well, for a start, win your next match and meet him in the finals. Mari's already lost this, she just doesn't know it yet, the puppeteer told him after thinking for a minute. As for the other bit, how about a compromise? Gaara raised an eyebrow, listening to his grinning brother, rip an arm off, then shake his other hand. The Ichibi Jinchuriki considered this for a minute before smiling in kind. I can live with that, and I'm sure he will too when I'm through with him. A man's temper is like cup ramen, red hot after 3 minutes, but stone cold 3 minutes after that. Naruto mused as he watched his opponent flip away from him, using the tip of her fan to cartwheel away from his attack. A woman's temper, on the other hand, is like the ramen Tenchijiji serves. It must be simmered before it can be brought to the boil. Right now though, seeing Temari come to a stop and bring her murderous gaze up to meet his face, the QB container slapped the proper, awestruck expression on his face as he finished his internal monologue. Time to put a bit more oil of the fire. Perfect, he breathed noisily, expression awestruck as he gazed as his hands, pert, firm and not a hint of cellulite. I'll never wash these hands again. Though really Temariheim, she was oh so close. If the next comment didn't break her, the one after it certainly would, he thought as he quirked an eyebrow at his foe, noticing how white the knuckles were as she gripped her battle fan almost tight enough to dent the steel. Granny pants at your age? Bingo. There wasn't a scream as he'd been expecting, but if the number of attacks heading his way was any indication, the Suna princess was rather upset with him at this point. However, as he ducked another attack and used a second sealless body replacement to avoid the follow-up, he decided just to be sure he was going to have to bring out the big guns to make sure his grand finale could work properly. With that in mind, he ran away from the kunoichi, dodging left and right with a few summoned shadow clones to swap place with to make sure her attacks missed, throwing a few barbs over his shoulder to make sure she drew deep on her chakra reserves. Temari-chan, don't be like that, you're a beautiful person. You don't need clothes like that to help you at all. He broke off to swap places with the nearest clone, grateful that he dodged that attack as he guessed that a blade of wind there would probably have put a damper on his eventual plan of getting a family with Sakura-chan. You just don't know how wonderful you are. Here. After throwing a glance over his shoulder, as seeing the girl breathing like a racehorse, he realized this was the perfect time for his penultimate strategy, and raised his voice for everyone to hear. Let me show you what I mean. Realizing what his surrogate grandson was talking about, the Hokage groaned, slapped a hand over his eyes, and tried to think of a way he could try to talk the other village leader out of demanding Naruto's head on a pike before these exams were over. There was a sudden explosion of smoke, quite a feat as none of Naruto's previous techniques had used them during summoning. Even the Kagebushin he'd used had been smokeless, just appearing from thin air. This time, as the smoke cleared, everyone in the audience gaped at the two Temaris now facing each other in the ring, each identical to the last detail, save one. The Temari that stood where Naruto had been was completely nude, save for a few wisps of strategically placed cloud. Yes, Kiba leapt up and punched the air as Naruto came through for him. I owe you one, buddy. Sorry, big man, pay up. He reached a clawed hand forwards and grudgingly, Chuji slapped a fresh bag of crisps into his open palm. Kiba grinned and made to look at the rotund ninja's teammate, only for Ino to fold her arms thunderously. That doesn't count. It's not Naruto, she stated, pointing at Naruto's girl form without looking at said henge. She's got too many ponytails. It's close enough, the dog Nin argued, flexing his fingers, after looking around and seeing she was going to get no support from her team, or sensei for that matter, Asuma being too preoccupied with trying to stop Kurenai throwing her most potent genjutsu at the henge ninja to help his student. She huffed, and slapped a 20 ryo bill into his hand. Pleasure doing business with you, suckers. Kiba smirked as he pocketed the note and opened the crisps, offering them around his team before laying one on the seat for Akamaru. Lesson 1: when dealing with Naruto, he doesn't think inside the box, outside the box, or on the box. He's unique and you just can't predict him. Ain't that the truth? Another voice broke in, Kankuro seeking a distraction from the sight of his sister disrobed in such a manner, forget dropped on his head. He must have been thrown out the window at birth to end up that screwed up. Temari will kill him for this, if not in the match then after it. Kiba chuckled, offering his crisps forwards as Sakura, face as pink as her hair, walked over to them, unable to watch any more. And if she doesn't I will, she declared, thrusting her hand into the open bag and shoveling the crisps into her mouth. I don't believe him sometimes. What made him pull that technique, and in front of the Kazekage, with his daughter for Kami's sake? I just pray he's got a sense of humor or Team 7's going to be a man down by the end of the day. Not that I'd shed a tear over his gravestone after this. Kankuro chuckled, helping himself a couple more crisps as he watched his real sister, crimson if not puce if the face, pull back her fan for one last attack. He should have. I wouldn't ask for his death, and Mario get over it when this is over. He's a nice enough guy. Didn't kill me when I asked him to. That's Naruto for you. Even if he doesn't mean to, he always makes you feel better in the... It was a sentence Sakura never finished, along with the bag of crisps that went uneaten, by humans at least. Akamaru ate well while everyone else was distracted, as they fell from Kiba's numb hand as he, along with the rest of the audience, was taken completely aback as Naruto wrapped up the match. See, you've got a wonderful body, Temari-chan, Naruto said, holding his hands down as he looked up and down the body he'd henged into. You just need to flaunt it a bit. Ah, seeing the potential attack coming, the henge waved a hand forwards. Don't do it, you'll blow the smoke away. Unfortunately, Temari either didn't care or was too angry to think about it as she prepared her most devastating attack. One of her summoned weasels already in her fan and ready to be launched at her opponent. She snapped the weapon open ready to let fly, when she saw, too late, the gleam of triumph in her body double's eye. Suddenly the weapon was gone, snatched from her hands, and sudden pressure was on her wrists. As the world tilted around her, an orange filled her vision. A glimpse from the corner of her eye told her what had happened. Somehow, Naruto had switched places with her fan in the middle of her using her technique. Her own momentum worked against her, the smaller Nin managing to roll her over his hip in a throw, though one of his knees under her shoulder blade stopped her tumbling to the floor. His free hand, the one not around her wrist, gripped the back of her neck under her hair as she reached for her kunai pouch, mouth still open in a scream of defiance, only for her to look into the face of her attacker and realize with a horrible jolt of foreboding what his plan had been all along. The realization flooded her, paralyzing all her ability to think and react. By the time she thought to even close her mouth, it was far too late. Silence fell like a shroud over the entire arena. the only noise coming from the two figures wrestling in the center of the ring as Temari fought to try and muscle her way out of the situation, though her struggles weakened as the seconds ticked by. A horrible sort of certainty settled in the minds of everyone present. Surely this would have to end soon, if only for one of the two partners to breathe, but it didn't look like happening any time in the near future. The quiet dragged on, pregnant and heavy with potential, until at last it was pierced by the single extending digit of an Inuzuka genin who was repelled and impressed in equal measure at his friend's performance. He's a machine! He could probably have swept the indecent exposure under the table as an albeit unusual battle strategy, and he could even have had a game go at bowing and scraping an excuse for the molestation that had taken place, but now, seeing Naruto perform an impromptu tonsillectomy on the Kazekage's daughter in front of all the visiting dignitaries, all Sarutobi could do was close his eyes and wonder how many kami he'd pissed off in his previous life for it to come to this. I was not aware, Hokage Dano. Despite everything, the Kazekage's tone was light, almost airy, and certainly not the tone of voice one would expect from a father forced to watch his eldest daughter being ravaged in front of him. That Konoha taught its genin advanced seduction techniques. No, but I know who would, and I know where he is as well. Sarutobi was not the professor for nothing. He already had that problem in hand and was looking forwards to getting the memories back when the beating ended. Until then, though, all he could do was try and smile his way through this mess. It does not, but Naruto is an unusual case. So it would seem, the other village leader commented dryly, looking down on the spectacle with an inscrutable expression on his face. The fact he appears to be able to breathe without the aid of his lungs alone would make him a valuable village asset. The Hokage could merely smile wanly at the humor and wait for two things to happen. He needed his favorite genin to break his lip lock with the Sand Princess, and he needed his shadow clone to find and beat Jiraiya to within a half-inch of his life. The upper tier of the Colosseum of the Hidden Leaf Village was mostly deserted as many of the potential guests had not arrived. However, despite appearances, it was not completely without habitation, though any casual observers may have been a little disconcerted at being unable to see the source of the giggling that seemed to come from somewhere on an empty row of seats. Oh, this is priceless, this is gold, hidden behind the cloaking jutsu only his teammate had even been able to breach, and that was only after repeated exposure to the jutsu. Not that he'd ever let Tsunade find that out. Jiraiya was writing double time and almost aglow with pride as he watched his godson score with one of the hottest kunoichi at this tournament. His latest novel was all but writing itself. The brave competitor fights against his heroine, a fierce battle of hate and love colliding until, unable to bear the passion, they consummate their brawling love on the bloodied Sanal. Precious little could interrupt one of the super pervert's novel planning monologues, but that precious little did not include the sudden grip that clamped around his left ear. Managing a shaky grin, the Gamma Sennin turned as much as he was able to see his sensei staring down at him with a thunderous look that plainly stated, "Your testicles are in peril if you don't answer my questions truthfully." Hello sensei, please remember my ears aren't detachable. Yet, the older man's clone informed him, twisting even harder to ensure he had his student's full attention. Naruto. Your cloaking jutsu. Explain. Now, he asked me to teach him it. I swear to the kami. Jiraiya all but shrieked the last part as Sarutobi's hand inched towards his kunai pouch. Look, it went smooth as silk for the first part. Kakashi took him to Ebisu, he got his chakra control halfway decent, and then we met. He signed the contract after I knocked Ebisu out. But then things changed a bit. Seeing his teacher think about this, Jiraiya took a chance and pulled his ear out of the danger zone, bringing a hand to the side of his head as he did so. The brat's a lot smarter than than anyone gives him credit for. He told me to my face that summoning won't be any good in the chunin exams except against maybe the Aburame, and he wasn't likely to face Shino at all. In the end we made a deal. If he summoned a toad, I'd teach him whatever he asked for the rest of the month. It took him 2 days, sensei. 2? Summoning was a low jounin level skill, though mostly that was due to the chakra drain of the technique. Still, to manage it in such a small time frame was nothing short of miraculous. Though this is the boy that learnt Kage Bushin in a night. I see, the Sarutobi clone said, folding his arms before taking a seat next to his pupil. So what did you teach him, and did the toads accept him? Of course, never a doubt about that. Though he hasn't been introduced to Bunty yet, that'll happen when we track down your successor. The toad sage informed him before starting to tick things off on his fingers. But summoning, my cloaking jutsu, apart from that we just really practices what he already knew until he's perfect at it. Henge, body switch, shadow clone, he can do them all without seals, words or smoke if he wants to. Though, the white-haired man's face went grim for a minute and his tone was stony as he faced his old mentor again. He has stumbled on the perfect assassination technique now. You saw it just then. But it's so simple I don't think even Naruto realizes what he's got yet. What do you mean, Jiraiya-kun? The pervert leant down to examine his notes, for a minute, flicking through his pad until his finger stopped under a particular entry, the eternity of pleasure. No, not the slap, what he did before that, seeing the Hokage trying to work out what he was driving at. Jiraiya put him out of his misery, sensei. There was nothing to replace himself with behind the girl. He body-switched with air. Sarutobi went very still and very quiet for a moment. When he turned to face his student again, his voice was nothing more than a dry croak. Hirishin. No, it's not summoning and he can't chain them as quickly as Minato could. Jiraiya had to quash that rumor as quickly as it had sprung up. Naruto was smart in ways his former student hadn't been, but he had yet to learn the intricacies of seal work. But it's still a nasty skill for anyone to have, never mind a genin. A genin not for much longer if I have any say in the matter, the clone promised, idly cursing when it realized it couldn't find a pipe in its robes. Still, you've given me much to think of, Jiraiya. And just for the record, if I even suspect Naruto is involved or mentioned in your next release, I will permanently ban the sale of Ika. Ika within Konoha, the Toad Sage went white and nodded. He knew Sarutobi could and would do such a thing, as the Hokage had the latest volumes delivered direct from the printers. Naruto was the character in one of your books, he doesn't need to be in anymore. With a sudden smack and a push away, Naruto broke his lip lock and scooted backwards. Luckily Temari's thick hair had hidden his left hand as it had been around the back of her neck, pumping chakra into the muscles around her jaw, preventing her biting his tongue out. He was no Hyuga, but he knew the rough location of those tenketsu and had chakra to burn. Throw enough mud at the wall, and some of it would stick eventually. He allowed himself a smile as he pushed himself to his feet, seeing the effect of his handiwork already apparent as his opponent swung around drunkenly to stare at him. Temari tried to focus on her now arch-nemesis, but everything was shifting, moving up and down and destroying her focus. Why you do Timmy? It was as far as she got before the darkness rushed up to claim her, and she collapsed into unconsciousness. Phew, just quick enough. When he'd seen her go to collapse, he'd rushed to get to the right place and had just managed it, sliding his arms around the taller girl's shoulders and midsection to stop her breaking her nose on the arena floor. Turning to face Hate, who was viewing the Suna Kunoichi with concern, Naruto shrugged as much as he was able to, spat a sleeping pill down her throat. What? Seeing the Jounin's disbelieving look, Naruto grew affronted. That wasn't for pleasure, you know. Well, not even he could hold back a blush as he recalled that he might have held the kiss for a little longer than was strictly necessary to ensure Temari swallowed the medicine he'd held under his tongue for the whole match. Not all of it anyway. Seeing this, and realizing the Kunoichi was truly gone and asleep, Hate raised his hand. Shosha, Uzumaki Naruto. At those words the orange-clad genin sagged for a minute. Just one more match to go, before hefting Temari in his arms and slowly turning her over to carry her bridal style. It wasn't that easy, she was a fair bit taller than him, but he eventually managed it, and began to pace towards the exit of the arena, not hearing the cheering from the rafters as much this time round as he beheld the sleeping face of the girl he'd just defeated. Sleep well, Tsunaheim, he breathed as he ascended the steps, shaking his head at the medicines that approached him. The pill was fast-acting once it hit the stomach, but it wore off in less than quarter of an hour, and 5 of that at least had already gone. All Temari needed was a few minutes' sleep and a drink of water when she woke up. Still, explaining this to her brothers might not be all that easy, and that was assuming. He winced as he felt the killing intent from halfway up the stairs. The other Kunoichi didn't rend him asunder the second he walked into the box. Oh well, no going back now, and I've always been a fast healer. With that, he took his life in his hands and poked a cautious toe over the threshold. Temari still comatose in his arms. Even he quailed as every female pair of eyes honed onto him like Anko onto fresh genin blood. Hi guys, guess I squeaked it, huh? No one said anything to either damn or redeem him, and Naruto felt the cold sweat start to trickle down the back of his neck before, with agonizing slowness, Kankuro walked over slowly. Great, he's going to be really happy that I tongue wrestled his sister. Hopefully Sasuke will avenge my death. And stood before him, face blank. Naruto offered a weak smile and wordlessly extended his arms and the prisoner in them. You not only beat, you humiliated my sister in front of an entire village of people, and knocked her out without her laying a hand on you. When you put it like that, it really does sound bad, doesn't it? Naruto flinched as the older genin spoke and took his sister off his hands. It's official then, you are a kami. Huh, obviously, Naruto wasn't the only one confused by this. I've been bugging Mari for years to get a boyfriend. Maybe that way she'll get off my back and onto his, the painted boy explained, turning away and leaving Naruto, with no brighter ideas at the minute, to follow in his footsteps. This at least should prove there are some men in the world as strong, or at least as sneaky, as she is. Though not many sneakier than you. Naruto suddenly froze as a hand fell on his shoulder, and he looked around to see the hard, red eyes of Kurenai boring into him. Was that necessary, Naruto? Gomen Kurenai-sensei, the boy mumbled apologetically, rubbing the back of his head in response to her hard tone. I guess that must have looked bad and wound you up, right? Yes, it did. Kunoichi half to the Jounin was entirely ready to give Kakashi's student the same lecture she'd given hers after Shino had politely informed her that her taijutsu skills were not quite Jounin level, but was cut off when Naruto stood taller and looked her square in the eye. In that case, you're already dead, he said from over her shoulder. As everyone blinked at the shadow clone that had appeared behind the bandaged Jounin, kunai placed against her spine, the original darted out of reach of the aggrieved teacher and shook himself down. I don't care if you're a shinobi, Kunoichi, Jounin, Chunin, Kage, Bijou or Kami himself. If you're my enemy, I will do whatever it takes to win and beat you down. If I have to drop my pants as a distraction, I will. If I have to slash my wrist so I can spray blood in your eyes and blind you, I will. I'm a ninja, damn it. There is no such thing as a fair fight when we're involved, even in training. Because out there, out on a mission, he looked at Kurenai and the other Kunoichi. his eyes lingering on each of their faces as he smiled darkly, an expression that truly didn't belong on his bewhiskered face. The only thing that differentiates a woman from a man to the enemy is what they can do to you if they catch you, and I will do anything, and I mean anything, to make sure that doesn't happen to me and Nin on my squad. Having said his piece, Naruto flopped into the nearest available seat and looked around, stopping when he met the unblinking stare of Gaara. Seeing this, his normal smile broke over his face and he called over, "Gaara-san, Shino." Both Nin looked over at him as looked fearfully over at where Temari had been propped up in a seat by her brother. "Good luck in your match. But please make it quick. That pill only lasts about another 10 or so minutes, and I need to be back in the arena before it wears off. I'd like to be out of fire country by then, but even I can't pull off a shunshin that far." There was a scattering of laughter at this comment, more so when Kankuro chipped in his Ryo's worth. "Yeah, and I need you back here pretty soon as well, Gaara. I fully intend to make the most of my divine right to tease her after this, but I'll need your shield to survive it." At this, Gaara smiled as he folded his arms, preparing to flicker into the arena. "I'm an insomniac, Kankuro. That doesn't mean I'm insane." Before his brother could comment, he was gone, leaving the other Nin to snap his fingers and curse. "Damn, I don't suppose anyone else wants to stand in as a convenient barricade. No? Ah well," he shrugged and steeled himself for a beating in the knowledge it was going to be worth it. "Someone's going to get hurt here," he said half to himself as his unresponsive sister shifted in her seat, obviously fighting an orange Oni in her dreams. "Just my luck, it's probably going to be me. What if Samehada leaves Kisame for Naruto?" And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.